What is up, my friend? Happy Friday. Welcome back to the Basement Brood Fantasy Football YouTube channel. I am Mikey Henninger, and this is episode 40 of Inside the 20 by Basement Brood Fantasy Football. And like we do every Friday at noon Central, we're going live to discuss week 5 of fantasy football. We're going to workshop your start-sit dilemmas, trade decisions. We're just going to talk week 5 fantasy football, and we're going to do it here live right now in episode 40 of Inside the 20 by Basement Brood Fantasy Football. Man, I'm feeling a little bit bummed out because there were comments in here before, but I suddenly don't see any. There's literally nothing. There's no comments, and there was a question already for me from Jacob, and I have no idea what it was. It's been that kind of morning for me. It's been the last 24 hours have just been a whirlwind. So from Tuesday through Thursday, I spend basically all of my time writing my weekly heat map, which is contextual analysis for every single player in every single game, every single week. It takes me 30 plus hours every week to create, but it's the resource that launched my entire company after it went viral on Reddit. So it takes me a really long time to create on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I was working up until the deadline basically on Thursday because we went to the Brewers playoff game last night, which I don't want to talk about. It was just more heartbreak for a Wisconsin sports team fan. But then today I had to go volunteer at my kid's school. I usually have 2 screens. This screen over here is just not working at all. It's just been that kind of morning. And now my comments on StreamYard have disappeared. So I'm not entirely sure where that question was, Jacob. I am, man, no, I don't want to talk about Pete Alonso, MMA outlawed. Appreciate it though, but let's not talk about Pete Alonso. Okay, let's talk about fantasy football. That's what we're here to talk about. We can't be talking Milwaukee Brewers, New York Mets. I'm not ready. It's too fresh. The wound is too fresh there. So, anywho, unfortunately, I don't have Jacob's question. It was here in comments. Jacob, if you're listening, if you're watching, please repost your comment. That would be super helpful. But it's not showing up. The only one I have is from MMA Outlawed, who's trying to tell me that Pete Alonso's daddy. That was one hell of a hit, man. There's no way for me to sugarcoat it. It was just, man, I have never been a part of an environment where 40,000 people go from ruckus to pure silence. And it was eerie how it just kind of, it was a great game. I don't want to talk about it. I'm going to start crying. Just kidding. He says, it's okay. I'm an O's fan. Yeah, I was rooting for the Orioles because of Corbin Burns. Obviously, as a Brewers fan, big fan of Corbin Burns. So I was rooting for you guys. And what's not to like about the Baltimore Orioles? So anyways, let's move on from baseball. The heart, again, it's too raw. The heartache is too raw. So I figured I'd start this way. If this is your first time joining the show, I've done this 2, maybe 3 Fridays now, but every Friday at noon Central, I hop on and I basically field as many questions as I possibly can over the next 45, 60, 90 minutes, where it makes sense, assuming no technical difficulties. Like I said, I'm literally down an entire computer screen right now, which is super frustrating. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you have anything you want to discuss, whether it's week 5 fantasy football, start-sit dilemmas, trade dilemmas, if you want to talk buffalo wings or the best beer in Milwaukee, or somebody was recently asking me what the cushion is down there. If you've never seen this before, we have a stair slide that goes down the stairs into our basement. and the cushion's there to make sure that my kids don't create a hole in my drywall. But point is, if you have any questions whatsoever, toss them in the comments and we will get to them. I'm going to start with one that I got from one of my subscribers, Mikey, and I apologize, buddy, if you're watching this and I totally said that. Wow, that kind of morning. If I pronounced your name incorrectly, Mikey, but he asked me on LinkedIn today. He said, I have a start sit question for you on the live. I am playing the last place team and I just got Darnell Mooney / Kyle Pitts. Okay, so he's hurting already. He's projected to lose by roughly 20 points. Currently, I have Jerome Ford in my second flex spot. Would you recommend rolling with Jerome Ford or replace him with Josh Downs if Joe Flacco starts for the upside play? So this is a really great example of where this is a really great example of where McKay is doing a great job of being conscious of his own particular matchup, his own particular situation, right? A lot of times we just kind of pick the players that are projected for the most, or we pick the players that we like the most, but it's important to always recognize what you might be aiming for. Are you aiming for maximum upside or are you aiming for safety, right? When you think of safety, you think about those guys that are going to get guaranteed touches, but maybe they don't offer those high explosion weeks. So this week, and let me go ahead and share my screen here. Share screen. I'm going to pop up the old heat map. If you're not familiar with the heat map, it's the weekly resource that started my entire company when it went viral on Reddit a couple years back. I think this works here. So just sharing my screen, adding it to the stage, and nope, that ain't it. That ain't it. Anyways, why can't we get this bad boy working? I'm just going to click around until something looks right. Tanner, if you're here, buddy, I need your help. I don't know why. There we go. I think that's what we're looking for. All right. So McKay basically wanted to know if he should go with Jerome Ford or if he should go with Josh Downs. Now, as I was mentioning at the beginning of this episode, remember that my previous 24 hours leading up to this point have been a whirlwind. Like, I've been basically disconnected from the NFL world, aside from knowing that the Falcons pulled off a great win yesterday. I've been disconnected from the NFL world for the last 12, 24-ish hours, meaning I haven't checked in yet to see if Anthony Richardson is playing. I think he practiced today. If I saw the notification on my phone correctly, that likely puts him on track to play. And if Anthony Richardson is going to play, that makes Josh Downs way, way, way less exciting. Like, wide receivers, it's a run-heavy offense. Wide receivers just haven't been producing with Josh Downs. Now, it also seems likely they won't have Jonathan Taylor. So, there might be some pressure there to put the ball in the air if they don't have that reliable workhorse back like a Jonathan Taylor. But if Anthony Richardson is going to play, it's hard to consider Josh Downs as anything more than just your generic, wide receiver 4/flex. There's really not as much upside there as we previously thought. Now, as for the game itself, right? Colts Jaguars, there's some general upside to this game in general, right? We got the Colts and Jaguars with a 46.5 point over under. That's that's above average. The Colts have an implied point total of about 22 points, which is about average. And they're going against a Jaguars defense that is allowing the 5th most PPR points per game to opposing wide receivers. Now, as for Josh Downs himself, right? This is game number, what was that? Game 7. Pop over to Josh Downs. Let's take a look at what we're looking at. Now, again, the Jaguars are getting absolutely smashed by wide receivers. They're allowing the 3rd most catches, 3rd most yards, 11th most touchdowns, and 5th most PPR points per game. This, by the way, that's not a new trend. They allowed the 10th most PPR points per game to wide receivers last season. And 5 different wide receivers in just 4 games have scored 16 or more PPR points against the Jags, including 2 that scored more than 26, one of which was Nico Collins last week. He scored 33-plus PPR points against the Jaguars. They're getting destroyed by wide receivers. Both Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs scored 18-plus PPR points against the Jags last week. Now, again, Josh Downs himself is coming off a banger. He went nuts with Joe Flacco last week, but Joe Flacco was a much, much different quarterback than Anthony Richardson. He caught 8 of 9 targets, 82 yards, 1 touchdown. He had over 22 PPR points last week, but that was with Joe Flacco. And like I mentioned, he's a much, much, much different quarterback than Anthony Richardson. And Anthony Richardson is likely to play in week 5 unless that has changed. Again, I haven't looked at the news in the last 12 hours. So unless that's changed, I'm expecting Anthony Richardson to start week 5. And in that case, there's just nothing that's especially exciting about Josh Downs' outlook besides the matchup itself. Like you and if a wide receiver is to go off, Michael Pittman would be a better bet, obviously, than Josh Downs would be. Now, on the flip side, we got the Cleveland Browns, who you mentioned were you got Jerome Ford. So we're looking at the Cleveland Browns. Now, the issue here with Jerome Ford is that the Browns are 3-point underdogs. And typically speaking, there's always a bit of a red flag when I'm looking at the running back on a team that is an underdog, unless you have a pass catching running back like an Alvin Kamara, for example. But in this case, the Browns are 3-point underdogs against the Commanders. Automatically don't love that for Jerome Ford. The Browns have a implied total of under 21 points. Don't love that for Jerome Ford because it suggests the Browns aren't going to score a lot of touchdowns, meaning Jerome Ford isn't as likely to score touchdowns as perhaps a team with a 28-point implied total like the 49ers. Now, the matchup itself is solid. The Commanders are allowing the 11th most PPR points per game to enemy running backs. And if you double click on Jerome Ford specifically, last year's Commanders allowed the 3rd most PPR points per game to opposing running backs. So they've been struggling against running backs for more than just these last 4 games. That's been going on for over a year now. 4 different running backs in 4 games have scored 16 to 21 PPR points on 17 to 21 touches against the Commanders. And Jerome Ford has 13 or more touches in 3 of 4 games. Now, he's not really doing a whole lot. He's averaging 14 touches per game. He's getting you about 13 PPR points per game. That's fine. That's flex worthy. And if you have him as your second flex, McKay, that's solid, right? There's a lot of people out there that have to depend on him to be their number 2 RB. And if you're depending on him to be a flex, that's a good sign. Anyway, the Commanders, they're holding Browns, or they're holding running backs to the 15th fewest touchdowns, but they're otherwise allowing the 11th most touches, 16th most catches, 11th most PPR points per game to opposing running backs. So it's a solid matchup for Jerome Ford. It's a solid matchup for Josh Downs. I would say with Anthony Richardson under center, that's a bad sign for Josh Downs, and it's one that I just wouldn't feel particularly great about. The Jaguars have struggled to compete with basically anybody this year, and who knows if that game will really be the shootout that it could be. I personally would just stick with Josh Downs, Jerome Ford, I would stick with Jerome Ford. He's a little bit of a safer play, and there's still that little bit of upside because of the matchup that he has. So hopefully that helps. And remember, even if it doesn't work out for you in week 5, we still want to score as many points as we can in the long run of the entire season, because eventually you get to the end of the year and tiebreakers kick into play. That's when points scored come into play. So I'd be going with Jerome Ford there. All right. Pate with the apostrophe wants to know start 2. Tutu Atwell, Kareem Hunt, Najee Harris, and Juju Smith-Schuster. So I cannot make this call without referencing my heat map. That's the whole reason I started creating the thing in the first place. So let me hop over there. Tutu, again, I only have one screen, so I'm trying to remember this. Tutu Atwell, Kareem Hunt, Najee Harris, Juju Smith-Schuster. Okay? By the way, while I'm pulling this up, if you are interested in getting the week 5 heat map, let me just type it here. Get your week 5 heat map here. I just left a link for you to do so in the comments. It should direct you over to my shop on Patreon. You can get the week 5 heat map. It costs less than a beer. It costs less than one Starbucks. It's $4.99 $4.99 for week 5. All right, so let's hop over and look at Tutu Atwell to start with. Now, looking at the game, right? Rams-Packers, this one is, generally speaking, this is a game worth targeting in Week 5 fantasy football. There's an over-under of 48.5, which is the second highest among all 14 games. Both teams are expected to score more than 22 points. So both teams have an above average implied point total, all the while basically suggesting that this game could and should be a bit of a shootout. And shootouts tend to lead to fantasy football points because there's more touchdowns, there's more yards, there's more action. This is a game that, generally speaking, you want to target if you can. So automatically, Tutu Atwell gets a nice little boost in the rankings, if you will, because he's a part of this football game. Now, if you want to look at him specifically, this is game number 11, okay? So we're looking in these 11s, found him right here. Tutu Atwell. What are we dealing with here? The TLDR, the bottom line, I'm treating him as a wide receiver 4/flex, albeit somebody who has some shootout upside and some matchup-based upside. So let's keep reading to talk a little bit about that matchup. We talked about the over-under. It looks good. We talked about the implied total. It looks good. Now, the Green Bay Packers have held enemy wide receivers to the 15th fewest catches this season. But other than that, they have allowed the 10th most yards, the 6th most touchdowns, and the 9th most PPR points per game. There have been 6 different wide receivers in 4 games that were able to reach 15 or more PPR points against the Packers, 3 of which scored 20 or more. Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison both scored 20 plus PPR points against the Packers just 1 week ago. So they're fresh off getting burned. Now, obviously, Tutu Atwell isn't Justin Jefferson or even Jordan Addison, but the Packers are clearly reeling in their secondary. After 2 games without Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, Tutu Atwell is definitely among the top 2 options in the Rams passing attack. He's averaging just 5.5 targets, just 4 catches, but he's getting you 84 plus yards. He has no touchdowns yet, but he's getting you dang near 13 PPR points per game. Again, it's a tiny sample size, so take that with a grain of salt. But if anybody's going to get the ball, it looks like Tutu Atwell and Jordan Whittington are the top 2 options in that passing attack while they're waiting for Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua to come back. Tutu scored 13 plus on 5 targets in week 3, 12 plus on 6 targets in week 4. He's a solid play. He's a part of a above average matchup in a possible shootout. There's just a lot to like about Tutu Atwell. Okay. I already forgot the second name here. So let's take a look. Kareem Hunt. Now we're feeling good about Kareem Hunt. Again, I have not looked at injury news or reports at all today. Last I saw, Kareem Hunt did pop up on the injury report. I can't remember. I think it was a shoulder injury. So just keep an eye on that, but I'm assuming he's good to go. I do have him in the heat map. When we're looking at the game, right, there's nothing that's noteworthy about the over-under. 43.5 is just middle. It's average. It's middle of the pack. But what we do like for Kareem Hunt is that, A, the Chiefs have an implied point total of 24.5. That's an above average. That's somewhere around the 5th or 6th most on the week. What are we in? Week 5 slate. And that suggests that the Chiefs should have no problem putting points on the scoreboard, increasing the possibility that Kareem Hunt scores a touchdown, right? He has a better chance of finding the end zone than, say, Zamir White, the running back on the Raiders, who have an implied point total of just 16.5. So we like that for Kareem Hunt. In fact, they have an implied point total of 24.5, and the Rams are just 22.7. So theoretically, the Chiefs are expected to score more points than the Rams are. Advantage Kareem Hunt. Okay. The other thing that we really, really, really like about Kareem Hunt, and I can't emphasize this enough, this is probably something I should focus on more with my content and what I talk to my subscribers about in our Discord server. But the fact that the Chiefs are 5.5 point favorites at home is a really, really good sign for Kareem Hunt's floor, because it suggests a win, right? It suggests that the Chiefs are going to win. 5.5 points, it's not drastic, but it's big enough to suggest that the Chiefs should win relatively easily, quote unquote, easily. The big thing here is that it suggests positive game script. Okay. So this is telling us that Kareem Hunt should experience, and the Chiefs should experience positive game script. They should play all 60 minutes, either tied or in the lead. And Kareem Hunt is not in any sort of risk, theoretically, of losing touches, losing rushing volume because the Chiefs fell behind. They shouldn't fall behind. They should be ahead. Volume should not be a concern for Kareem Hunt. So you got volume, right? Because he took over as the team's RB1. It was pretty obvious in week 4. And you have a solid implied point total. So you're taking a guy who's going to get the ball, has a chance to score touchdowns. That's all good. What's not great, however, is his matchup, right? The Saints you'll see they have a 22 next to their name underneath running back. That says that they're 22nd in the NFL against running backs. In other words, they're holding running backs to the 11th fewest PPR points per game. Now, clicking into Kareem Hunt in particular, right? TLDR, I'm treating him as an RB3/flex, but he does have some game script enhanced upside, which is what we talked about before. In his first game back with the Chiefs, Kareem Hunt took over the backfield pretty much instantly, right after Carson Steele fumbled the football. Kareem Hunt handled 16 touches, which included 2 catches on 3 targets, 85 scoreless yards, 10.5 PPR points. We talked about the Chiefs being 5.5-point home favorites. That's all good news. What we don't like is that the Saints are tough on running backs. They're holding running backs to the 4th fewest touches, 11th fewest rushing yards, 9th fewest touchdowns, and 11th fewest PPR points per game, all while allowing the 11th most catches and 13th most receiving yards. So if you're desperate for some optimism about Kareem Hunt's matchup, the Saints are giving up the 11th most running back catches, 13th most running back receiving yards. The Saints have been tough on running backs this year, but that is not at all a new trend. In fact, it's been going on for about half a decade that Saints are tough on running backs. They have held enemy running backs to the 12th fewest or worse PPR points per game in each of the last 4 seasons. They held them to the 7th fewest PPR points per game last year. And you always need to be careful when you're considering previous years of data, because every year is new, especially when it comes to defenses and what they're strong at, what they're weak at. But the Saints have been good against running backs for a half a decade at this point. That's worth noting. Now, Saquon Barkley did score over 31 PPR points against the Saints in week 3, but he needed 21 touches to get there, which that's fine. 21 touches for 33 points. That's great. But other than that, no other running back has been able to reach 12 PPR points against the Saints. Now, keep in mind, however, no other running back has handled even just 12 touches against the Saints, and Kareem Hunt should get more than that. He should be a lock for at least 15 touches in week 5, health permitting. Again, we got to see what's going on with that shoulder. Rico Dowdle scored just under 10 points on 11 touches. Bijan got 11 points on 11 touches, and Algier scored 10 on 10 touches. So basically, running backs seem to be averaging about 1 point per touch. Kareem Hunt should be a lock for 15 touches, but don't actually take that seriously. That's 1 point per touch is not a thing. It's just kind of the way it's been going. So all in all, we're feeling good about Kareem Hunt, right? Ultimately, these 2 things are more important to me than the matchup, because volume is ultimately what wins fantasy football games. It's ultimately what wins championships, whereas so the spread in the implied total helps us predict volume. It tells us that Kareem Hunt, if the game goes as it should or as it's supposed to, Kareem Hunt should be a lock for about 15 plus touches. The matchup helps us predict efficiency. So it's saying, hey, Kareem Hunt might get a ton of touches. He just might struggle to find yards. He might struggle to find a lot of room to operate. He just might not. We shouldn't expect him to go absolutely nuts and run through this Swiss cheese defense, because that's not who the Saints are. But ultimately, if you can give me a running back and tell me, hey, this guy's going to get 15 touches, that is a good sign. That is somebody that, typically speaking, I would want in my fantasy football lineup. We're going to look at Najee Harris. Now, here is a perfect example of plenty of touches, zero efficiency, because this dude is getting like 20 plus touches a week, and he's doing nothing, absolutely nothing with them. Jalen Warren's most likely not going to play. Cordell Patterson is most likely not going to play. That's going to lock Najee Harris into another 20-ish touches, which automatically is appetizing from a fantasy football standpoint. When you look at this game, there's nothing remarkable about the over-under, nothing particularly remarkable about the spread. It's good that the Steelers are favored. That's not a bad thing for Najee Harris, although the spread is very close. The Cowboys could easily win this game, and that is a little bit risky for Najee Harris. The implied total is about average, 22.5 points. That doesn't suggest a lot of touchdowns, but it doesn't suggest that the Steelers are going to struggle to score either. What we do like about Najee Harris is that the Cowboys are currently allowing the 3rd most PPR points per game to opposing running backs. So scrolling down to number 13, popping open the entry for Najee Harris, what are we dealing with? He's a volume-based running back 2. He's a results-based RB running back 3. He's got some upside in what looks like a really strong matchup here. Now, after 4 games, the Dallas Cowboys are getting absolutely wrecked by running backs. They're allowing the 12th most catches, 6th most receiving yards, 12th most rushing yards, 2nd most touchdowns, and overall they are allowing the 3rd most PPR points per game. There have been 4 different running backs in 4 games that have handled double-digit touches against the Cowboys this year, all of which landed somewhere between 15 touches and 26 touches. Jerome Ford scored, that's hard to say fast, nearly 19 PPR points on 18 touches in week 1. Alvin Kamara went insane in week 2. He scored 44 points on 22 touches. Derrick Henry scored 30-plus points on 26 touches in week 3. And then Devin Singletary scored just 4.8 points on 15 touches in week 4. Now, again, we talked about Najee Harris. After 4 games, he's averaging an absurd 19.5 touches per game. The dude is getting plenty of opportunities, yet somehow, despite nearly 20 touches per game, he's averaging a pathetic 10.3 PPR points per game. That's one of those Will Ferrell. Actually, I'm not even mad. I'm impressed. Like, you ate a whole block of cheese. Like, how you can have 20 plus touches, but 10 PPR points is beyond me. If anything, that does suggest that maybe there's some positive touchdown regression coming, because this dude is averaging nearly 20 touches per game, nearly 78 scrimmage yards per game, but he has no touchdowns. Sooner or later, something's going to give, and he's going to find the end zone. Maybe that could be right here in week 5. So we're feeling fine about Najee Harris. It's hard to feel good about him at this point, but that's where we're at. And then Juju Smith-Schuster. We talked about the Saints. We talked about the Chiefs. High implied total. Now, typically speaking, where being a 5.5 point favorite is a good thing for the running back, it's not a bad thing for the wide receiver, because 5.5 points isn't this like huge spread. It's not like the Chiefs are 14-point favorites or anything like that. But again, it does suggest a somewhat easy win where the Chiefs should enjoy positive game script. Theoretically, in the second half, they might be looking more to kill the clock than put points on the board. But again, that's more for a spread that is like 10 points, 11 points, 12 points. 5.5, that's still narrow enough that it's a 1-score game. The Chiefs should still be throwing in the second half. Don't put too much stock into that, but it's just not as good as it could be for volume purposes for Juju as it would be for, say, Marvin Harrison on the Cardinals, who are 7.5 point underdogs, implying they're going to need to throw the ball in the second half. That just might not be the case for Juju. But here's what we know. Here's what we need to know about Juju moving into week 5. For starters, I'm approaching him as an opportunity-based wide receiver 4 or flex. Now, Rashee Rice is out for at least 4 games. That frees up about 8 to 10 targets in a Patrick Mahomes offense that needs to find new homes. Travis Kelce's an obvious beneficiary there. Justin Watson's been playing full-time snaps, although we'll talk about that in a minute because we've seen that movie before and it doesn't really go anywhere. Xavier Worthy should experience a nice boost in volume, but Juju Smith-Schuster is every bit worthy of consideration in week 5 fantasy football leagues. And here's why. In 19 games with the Kansas City Chiefs, which was in 2022, so 2022 was when Juju was with the Chiefs, but Rashee Rice was not with the Chiefs quite yet. Tyreek Hill wasn't in the picture either. And in 19 games with the Chiefs, without Rashee Rice, Juju averaged just under 6 targets, just under 5 catches, just under 54 yards, and about 11 PPR points per game, all while scoring just 3 touchdowns. So there's some touchdown regression that could be said there that would make the PPR points look even better. But he averaged about 11 PPR points per game in 19 contests with the Chiefs, with Patrick Mahomes, but without Rashee Rice. That's something right? That's worthy of consideration in fantasy football. He's instantly in play as an option in week 5. He scored 15 or more PPR points in 5 of those 19 games, which is only 26%. That's not great. He scored fewer than 10 PPR points in 11 of those 19 games, which is about 58%. So also not great. And that's why I'm treating him more like an opportunity-based wide receiver 4/flex than I am somebody who's going to come in and suddenly get 8 to 10 targets per game. We shouldn't expect that from Juju, but we should expect him to be on the fantasy football radar. Now, his matchup. The Saints are allowing the 7th most catches and 7th most yards to wide receivers, but they're holding them to the 4th fewest touchdowns and 14th fewest PPR points per game. They've been tough on wide receivers for years, holding them to the 16th fewest or worse PPR points per game in each of the last 4 seasons. So again, half a decade of great defense by the New Orleans Saints. It's just one of those things. There's a reason that I have Juju Smith-Schuster in the yellow column C, meh, with a yellow dot. There's just nothing that is particularly exciting, and there's nothing that's particularly daunting about Juju Smith-Schuster's matchup. So, start 2. If we're looking for safety or floor plays, I would be looking at Kareem Hunt. I would be looking at Najee Harris. If we're looking at upside, I would be looking at Tutu Atwell. So I would say, Pate, do with this what you will. But if you're looking at your opponent, if I don't know if you had any Falcons players go, Buccaneers players go, I don't know if you went against any Falcons or Buccaneers, but if you're looking at your week 5 situation and say, I just need a solid, sturdy 10, maybe hopefully 15, hopefully 20 points, looking at Kareem Hunt, looking at Najee Harris, they're going to be safer plays than Tutu Atwell. Tutu Atwell has the upside because he's participating in that possible shootout. The Rams are projected to lose. They should have to throw the ball a little bit more frequently than perhaps they'd like. There's more theoretical upside to Tutu Atwell, but if it was me, I personally would most likely be going with Kareem Hunt and Najee Harris if I had to choose from those two. So hopefully that helps. Again, keep your own situation in mind. Keep in mind whether or not you need like massive ceiling or if you just need somebody to get you some points. And again, Najee Harris doesn't feel comfortable, but he should get you at least 10 points. And at some point, the dude is going, even if he just falls into the end zone, it's going to happen. Hopefully that helps. All right. Let's go with... Let me grab a quick drink here. In fact, this sounds like a really good time for me to be right back after one quick word from our sponsor. Are you a software wizard? A code ninja? A forge master? Or maybe even just a mad scientist? Then come build your career ladder with Infinity Labs, an award-winning technology company, best place to work, and business of the year with best-in-class benefits and compensation. Visit i-labs.tech. That's i-labs.tech today, where you can learn more about Infinity Labs, our expanding national presence, and why the status quo has no hold on us. You know what I need? I just realized I need somebody to be my person that like reads comments and then throws them up here, because it's hard for me to like read the comments and keep the show going. But thankfully I got myself, and this is not a paid promotion, a McDonald's large Coke. Jordan, I hope you're not watching this. It's just been one of those mornings where I just needed that McDonald's Coke because it hits so much different than any other soda or any other kind of caffeine. All right. Dino wants to know PPR, pick 2, full PPR, Garrett Wilson, Scary Terry, Christian Kirk. Let's go to the heat map. Garrett Wilson, we're going to start with the Jets at Vikings, right? This one's in London. Now, generally speaking, the game itself, it's not necessarily one that on the surface you want to target relentlessly. The over-under is just 40.5. That's not particularly strong. That's below average. Both teams are projected to score fewer than 22 points. Both teams are below average implied totals. This is just suggesting that there's not necessarily going to be a lot of touchdowns. There's not necessarily going to be a lot of fantasy football fireworks. That doesn't mean you should avoid this game. Obviously, guys like Justin Jefferson, Garrett Wilson, like there's guys that you want to be in the game. But just generally speaking, from a game standpoint, there's nothing about this one that's like particularly exciting, right? The Jets have an implied point total of just 19 points. They're 2.5 point underdogs. Now, what we do like for Garrett Wilson is right here. The Minnesota Vikings are getting smashed by wide receivers, and that's not new. That's something that's been going on for a long time. We'll pop open Garrett Wilson's note here. I'm treating him as a waiting to explode wide receiver 2 with matchup enhanced upside in week 5. Guys, Garrett Wilson is one of my favorite buy lows in all of fantasy football. Now, if you ask me if I'm nervous about the Jets trading for Devontae Adams, yes. I wouldn't be excited for Garrett Wilson if they traded for Davante Adams. But as I mentioned recently in my Discord server, which is an online community of 198 other fantasy football players, we're in there talking ball all the time. You should definitely join the Discord server if you haven't already. But somebody was asking if they should be trying to trade Garrett Wilson, preparing for a possible Davante Adams trade to the Jets. And my response was, again, yes, it's not something I'd be excited about, but I wouldn't rush to trade Garrett Wilson away, because it's like, would you want to have T. Higgins if Jamar Chase is still in Cincinnati? Absolutely would. Garrett Wilson is the type of wide receiver who's so talented that being the number 2 wide receiver in an Aaron Rodgers offense still can work. Okay. And you could always make the argument that, okay, if the Jets go get Davante Adams, who our opposing defense is going to focus on more, Davante or Garrett Wilson, the guy who hasn't quite clicked yet? So you could make the argument that Garrett Wilson will get better looks as a wide receiver 2 than he does as a wide receiver 1, perhaps at the expense of volume. But as for, that's the worst part about the McDonald's Coke, is that I feel it's coming after me now. All right. Now, Garrett Wilson, at some point, he's going to erupt. He's going to explode. There's a 20-point week. There might be a 30-point week coming at some point. Now, here's what we love about this matchup. After 4 games, the Minnesota Vikings are getting absolutely smoked by wide receivers. They're allowing the second most catches, the most yards, and the third most PPR points per game. They're averaging 44. They're giving up 44 PPR points per game to enemy wide receivers, all while holding them to the 14th fewest touchdowns. And anybody who understands basic math can tell you there's some regression coming there at the team level for the Minnesota Vikings defense. If you're giving that many catches and that many yards, but you're not allowing touchdowns, one or the other has to give. Either the yards and the catches have to come back, which they won't, or the touchdowns are going to start funneling in. So at some point, the Vikings defense is going to break. That's not new, kind of like the Saints, but in reverse. It's a half-decade trend. The Vikings have allowed the 7th most or more PPR points to wide receivers in each of the last 4 seasons. They allowed the 5th most last year. This is not new. The Vikings have struggled against wide receivers for years now. 8 wide receivers in just 4 games have scored at least 11 PPR points against the Vikings this year. 4 wide receivers in 4 games have scored at least 18 PPR points, including more than 24 from both Dontavian Wicks and Jaden Reed last week. Now, Jordan Love had to throw the ball more than 50 times last week, but still, the Vikings are getting absolutely wrecked by wide receivers. Now, after 4 games, Garrett Wilson is averaging just 5 catches, 47.8 yards. He has 1 touchdown. He's just getting 11 PPR points per game, and that is why, actually, this is why. He just hasn't been doing well, but he is getting you 8.5 Aaron Rodgers targets per game. That is a number that is going to pop at some point. At some point, something is going to break, and Garrett Wilson is going to go absolutely wild. Could it be this week against the Vikings, who are allowing the 3rd most PPR points per game to wide receivers? I think he has as good a chance as any. Okay. Now, Garrett Wilson has 6 or more targets in all 4 games. He's got 8 or more targets in 3 of 4 games. And yeah, all this other stuff we already talked about, like what to expect from the Jets, the game. So we don't really love the over-under. We don't love the implied total, but we do love Garrett Wilson getting 8+ targets. We do love the Jets are underdogs, so theoretically they're going to be needing to throw the ball throughout the game. It's not like they're just going to be able to just kill the clock in the second half, most likely. So feeling pretty good about Garrett Wilson. Eventually he's going to pop. I would love to roll the dice on him this week if that's an option for you. Scary Terry. Back to the heat map, we're looking at the Commanders, right? So it's Commanders, Browns. Nothing that's particularly exciting about the over-under. It's just middle of the pack. It's average, mediocre. Commanders are favored, but not favored in a overly drastic number. It's not like it's going to be a 2-score game. And the Commanders do have an above average implied total. It's just not particularly thrilling. 23.25s, that's solid. It's not spectacular. And then you got the Browns, who are allowing the 15th most, quote unquote, PPR points per game, but that's still average. That's still middle of the pack. It's not like there's anything about this matchup that's a screaming like, oh, he's going to go absolutely crazy. So just on the surface, if I'm just staring at those numbers, I would much rather go with Garrett Wilson because I like his matchup a heck of a lot better than I like Terry McLaurin's. Now, we're looking at game number 8. Terry McLaurin, I have him in column C, yellow with a yellow dot. Perfectly fine wide receiver 3, but he's got a tough-ish matchup in week 5. The Browns are holding opposing wide receivers to the 14th fewest catches, 11th fewest yards, and 14th fewest touchdowns, but they're allowing the 15th most, quote unquote, PPR points per game. That's because they're allowing a decent amount of wide receiver rushing yards and wide receiver rushing touchdowns, which is not something we should bet on with Terry McLaurin. So if you remove the rushing statistics, the Cleveland Browns are actually a below average matchup for wide receivers. And the Browns have held opposing wide receivers to the 8th fewest or worst PPR points per game in each of the last 3 seasons, including the 3rd fewest last season. So just 2 wide receivers in 4 games have been able to reach 15 PPR points against the Browns. And if you remove their rushing statistics, just 1 has been able to reach 15 PPR points against the Browns this year. There's just not a lot to love about Scary Terry. I for sure would be, so Garrett Wilson is locked in. Like he's in the lineup in this equation. Now it's going to be Scary Terry against Christian Kirk. Okay, we look at the Jaguars. Again, we already talked a little bit about the game. We like Colts at Jaguars. Strong over-under. Nice implied total for the Jaguars, 24.5 points. That's even better than the Commanders are getting at 23.5 points. The matchup looks better with the Colts giving up the 7th most PPR points per game. Christian Kirk himself has been balling over the last 2 games, thankfully, because the first 2 games were brutal. I'm treating him as a solid wide receiver 2 play. He has some added upside that's boosted by the matchup and the possible shootout, right? We talked about the over-under being 46.5. Both teams have an above-average implied total. 5 wide receivers in 4 games have scored 15 or more PPR points against the Colts this year. That includes 21 or more PPR points from Stephon Diggs and Rome Odunze in week 3. Now, Christian Kirk himself, like I mentioned, he's turning it on. He did have a terrifying first 2 weeks. He managed just 7 targets and 2 catches in the first 2 weeks, but he's turned it up in the last 2 games, catching 15 of 22 targets, 140 yards, 1 touchdown, 35 PPR points over the last 2 games. He scored 15.9 on 10 targets in week 3, 19.1 on 12 targets in week 4. And the Colts, like I said, they're getting absolutely smashed by wide receivers. They're giving up the 11th most catches, 8th most yards, 11th most touchdowns, and the 7th most PPR points per game to opposing wide receivers. And in 4 career games, I forgot about this. This is noteworthy. In 4 career games against the Colts with Trevor Lawrence as his quarterback, Christian Kirk is averaging just 5 targets per game. 4 career games against the Colts with Trevor Lawrence, 5 targets per game. That's concerning. Now, thankfully, man, I have the itchiest nose. I don't know if that's a thing, but whoo. Now, thankfully, Christian Kirk is also averaging 1 touchdown per game. So he is averaging 13.1 PPR points per game, but he scored fewer than 14 PPR points in 3 of 4 games against the Colts, including just 1.9 points in week 1 of last season. But he did score 13.9 against them in week 6. So there's some specific opponent-based red flags there for Christian Kirk. He just seems to struggle against the Colts since he's joined the Jaguars, but still, given everything else that's working in his favor, the possible shootout, the nice matchup, the fact that he's got 20-plus targets in the last 2 weeks, Scary Terry is the odd man out. If this is my league and I have to make this decision right here, Garrett Wilson is in, Christian Kirk is in, Scary Terry is the odd man out. Hope that helps, Dino. Oh my gosh, my nose. All right. Jacob Shockley, my man, he wants to know Vikings defense or Seahawks defense. So let me pop open the heat map. Luckily, if you've never seen the heat map before, I do have a streamers and stashes tab. This is where you can go to see defenses that you want to plug in playoff waivers, kickers that you want to plug in playoff waivers. I'm currently working on a kicker-based research project where I can better identify kickers that are going to have a big week in fantasy football. This is where you go if you need to plug and play a tight end, plug and play a quarterback. If you want to look at running backs that you should grab off waivers and stash on your bench, that will become instant RB2s if the guy in front of them goes down. I got you covered. But the question here is Vikings or Seahawks. Now, the Vikings are going against the Jets, which we talked about. The Jets have an implied point total of just 19 points. Who was the other one? I already forgot. Seahawks. Oh, and then, the Seahawks are going against the New York Giants, who have an implied point total of just 18.5 points. So that's already fewer than the Jets. You can make a choice of going against either Daniel Jones, who does not have Malik Neighbors this week, or you can go against Aaron Rodgers, who has Garrett Wilson and he has all of his passing options. This one to me is pretty easy. I'm going with the Seattle Seahawks. I would want to target Daniel Jones with my defense if I can. So Seattle Seahawks for me, Jacob. All right, my man GQ is in the house. Greg, thank you for tuning in, my friend. So Greg's one of my biggest, he's one of my best friends on the planet. He's one of my biggest supporters. I can't thank this guy enough for everything he's done for me in my life. With Christian Watson out, who do you like in the Packers wide receiver room? Wicks is getting a lot of publicity. So I love this question. Thank you for asking. So for anybody who's watching for the first time, you can see back there, I'm a big Packers fan, right? So if there's one team that I'm especially plugged into, now I do 30 plus hours of research every week. I like to think I have, I've literally, this heat map, you guys, has 250 players, each of which has their own notes. Okay. So I've done 30 plus hours of research on 250 plus players. I like to think if you ask me any name, I could tell you what to expect from them in week 5. This is the tool that launched my company after it went viral on Reddit. But if there's one team I'm just a little bit extra plugged into, it's the Packers. Okay. Now, the thing that's funny about this question is because last week, before Christian Watson got hurt, one of my subscribers messaged me on Discord. Again, if you're not in our Discord server, I highly recommend it. Fantasy football community. There's 198 of us helping each other out. You got to join. And that's in the link in my Patreon. But one of my subscribers asked me, hey, who do you like more just moving forward, just in general, Romeo Doubs or Dontavian Wicks? And I told them Romeo Doubs. Romeo Doubs is on the field more than any other wide receiver, right? Jaden Reed is stealing the show because he's the best wide receiver that the Packers have. I just want to make sure that's clear. Jaden Reed is in a tier of his own compared to other Packers wide receivers. But there's no wide receiver that is on the football field more than Romeo Doubs is. He's getting good target volume. It just hasn't quite clicked yet. And that's because he's not necessarily a big upside type of wide receiver. He's a volume guy. He's not an upside guy. Dontavian Wicks is the exact opposite. Dontavian Wicks is a guy that, quite frankly, coming into the season, during draft season, I didn't understand why he was drafted as high as he was, right? We were seeing him go in the 10th, 11th, sometimes the 10th round, which never made sense to me because let me stop and say real quick, I love Dontavian Wicks. If it were up to me, he would be a full-time player for the Packers, but it's not up to me. It's up to the Packers coaching staff, and the Packers coaching staff up to this point has ran Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, and Christian Watson ahead of Dontavian Wicks. Coming into the season, Wicks was never any better than 4th in line for targets. So him being drafted in the 10th or 11th round never made sense at any point until now, because Christian Watson being out is going to put Dontavian Wicks on the field for the majority of snaps, 50, 60, 70 plus snaps perhaps. He's going to be on the field if the Packers run 3 wide receiver sets. I'm curious to see if he's going to be on the field in 2 wide sets with Jaden Reed out. There's noted he had 13 targets last week when Christian Watson went out. He's done well when Christian Watson's been out. There's been a lot of publicity, a lot of hype about Dontavian Wicks, and here's the thing. It's totally warranted. Totally warranted. The kid is talented. He's a really good football player. He's going to be playing a lot more snaps in a Jordan Love offense. He's got a shootout with the Rams. The Rams have been getting absolutely torched by wide receivers. There is a lot to like about Dontavian Wicks this week, next week, the next 2, 3, 4 weeks while Christian Watson's out. But when Christian Watson comes back, if Dontavian Wicks hasn't run away with the job, it's back to boom or bust flex for Dontavian Wicks. But moving forward, he's a high-end wide receiver 3 with big, big upside. Romeo Doubs is going to be more your consistent volume guy that gets, 8 targets, 6 catches, 60 yards, something like that. But Dontavian Wicks is the guy that can blow the top off, okay? So if I had to choose, and I'm usually a guy that wants to swing for the fences, I'd be going Jaden Reed. I would be going Dontavian Wicks over Doubs. But Doubs shouldn't be Doubs is still a good option as well. But yeah, I mean, Dontavian Wicks is getting a ton of publicity, and it's right. He should be getting a ton of publicity because he finally has the opportunity that will pay off the ADP that he had earlier in the season. If that makes sense. Great question. Jacob Keys wants to know, I'm being offered JJ, which I'm assuming is Justin Jefferson, Evan Ingram, and Najee for DK and Walkers. Who's Walkers? Walker? Kenneth Walker? It's got to be, right? I can't think of another Walker besides Javon Walker, and that's obviously not it. So you're getting Justin Jefferson, you're getting Evan Ingram, and you're getting Najee Harris for DK Metcalf and Kenneth Walker. So here's the thing, man. I'm a big believer in getting the best player in the trade, which you'd be getting, Justin Jefferson, +2. You're getting Jefferson plus 2 players. Now, Evan Ingram doesn't really move the needle for me. Sorry, Derek, if you're listening. Najee, again, it's really hard to get excited about Najee Harris right now because Najee Harris is the typical buy low type of player because the results aren't there yet. He's not getting into the end zone, so the fantasy points aren't coming, but the volume is. And usually where there's smoke, there's fire. Where there's volume, there's fantasy points. Not always, but more often than not. Steelers offense took a step forward last week. At some point, Najee Harris is going to start finding the end zone. He has to. This Jaylen Warren injury, there's an eerie lack of data and information there. We don't know what's going on. He's not on IR, so it must not be a long-term thing, but we also don't really know what's going on with Jaylen Warren. Cordell Patterson's not an actual threat. Najee Harris should continue to get 20-plus touches per game for the foreseeable future. And at some point, that's got to pop. I'd be totally fine accepting that trade. I mean, you're getting Justin Jefferson out of it. You're getting the best possible side. The one thing I want to say before you hit accept, Jacob, the one thing I want to say is look at the bigger picture before you do anything. Other things that matter, when you put this in a vacuum, I'm fine with this trade because you're getting Justin Jefferson out of it. But when you take a step back and you look at the bigger picture, other things matter. I don't know your scoring settings. I don't know how big of how many teams are in your league. Is it 8 teams, 10 teams, 12 teams? I don't know how many wide receivers or running backs you start. I don't know how big the bench is. I don't know what your waiver wire pool looks like. All of those things matter. And generally speaking, if the players that you're about to acquire will be in your starting lineup, then that's an okay trade. If you're making a trade just to fluff your bench a little bit, unless it's a dynasty league, probably not. But I'm assuming you're upgrading your wide receiver, although props to DK. DK's balling this year, but still, we're talking Justin Jefferson. Downgrading at running back, but not necessarily by much. Evan Ingram should, the tight end landscape is so disgusting this year that Evan Ingram is an option where so many tight ends right now aren't even options. So it's a fine trade. It totally depends on what you need. What the rest of your, what's your quarterback? What are your other receivers? What are your other running backs? All of that context matters because listen, Justin Jefferson is the best player in this trade, but DK Metcalf and Kenneth Walker is a pretty darn good package too. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind what you need and what you need moving forward. So hopefully that helps. Diggs, by the way, one says, hey, what's up? What's up, Diggs? Hopefully, is that the Diggs? That'd be pretty sweet. CMAC21 says, full PPR, Jalen Waddle, Keon Coleman, or Kareem Hunt for my last flex spot. Keon Coleman is interesting with the news of Shakir being out. So that's news. I didn't know that. I told you that the last 24 hours I've been so underwater with raising kids, Brewers playoffs, running a business, IT issues, that I haven't been up to date with the last 12 or so hours of NFL news. Had no idea that Khalil Shakir's out. So that's something I'm going to have to take a look at. Yeah, that 100% makes Keon Coleman significantly more interesting, right? Because Khalil Shakir, if there's one player that's been the consistent option for the Bills in their passing game, it's been Khalil Shakir. And that's gone now. So we got to find a new place for those targets. So let's go back to the heat map. Again, that's the whole reason I even created this bad boy because I can't do it. I couldn't do these decisions without it. So let's just stick with the Bills because that's what we were talking about. Oh, yes. Okay. Bills, Texans. This is one of the games of the week, right? If you had to make a fantasy football lineup out of just one game, there's a couple this week, but Bills and Texans are definitely a part of that. They have a strong over-under, 47.5 points. There should be no shortage of touchdowns here. It's going to be a close game. The spread's no greater than 2. Both teams have an implied point total of 23 or more. That's above average for all 28 teams in the NFL this week. So it's a great game to target. So automatically that is a check for Khalil Shakir. Also, what we like is that the Houston Texans are allowing the 11th most PPR points per game. But again, you never just want to take that at face value because there's always could be a few things making that number that don't necessarily apply to Keon Coleman. So let's go look at Keon Coleman. This is game number 6, right? First of all, let me look at Khalil Shakir to remember what he was averaging. Khalil Shakir is getting, he's only getting 4.8 targets per game. So about 4 to 5 targets every game, but still, those are 4 to 5 targets that are now free in the Buffalo Bills offense. So let's look at Keon Coleman specifically. Oops, I just went right past him. All right. Prior to the Khalil Shakir news, I said Keon Coleman is a deep, desperate, something has to happen at some point type of wide receiver 4 or flex. He does have matchup-based upside, shootout-based upside. And I do like Keon Coleman as a flyer in DFS tournaments more than I like him in a season-long lineup, and that's because of his low target volume. He just hasn't been getting targets to be a consistent option in fantasy football. We talked about the over-under. We love it. We talked about the implied point total. We love it. Bills should score plenty of points. 7 wide receivers in 4 games have scored 11 or more PPR points against the Texans. That includes 4 wide receivers that scored 19 to 22 PPR points. Brian Thomas and Christian Kirk, both of those guys, scored 19 to 22 PPR points against the Texans just 1 week ago. So they're reeling. They're fresh off of getting toasted by Jacksonville Jaguars wide receivers. They're allowing the Texans are allowing the 16th most catches, 11th most yards, 4th most touchdowns, and 11th most PPR points per game to wide receivers. Now, what we don't love is that Keon Coleman himself is averaging less than 3 targets, less than 3 catches, less than 32 yards, and less than 7 PPR points per game. It's hard to actually consider him in a fantasy football lineup. He has yet to reach 6 targets, 5 catches, 52 yards, or 10 PPR points in a single game in his career. Again, it's really difficult to actually consider Keon Coleman in a lineup. But with Khalil Shakir and his 4 to 5 targets being out, that definitely adds more to Keon Coleman's play. Keon Coleman's been on the field plenty. It's not like he's this like rotational part-time player. He's playing plenty of the snaps. At some point, something has to give. But we've been saying that about Dalton Kincaid, and I don't know. All right, let's hop over to the Dolphins, talk about Mr. Jalen Waddle. Dolphins game. By the way, guys, I am happy to answer these questions and give you my, if this was me, here's what I would do. I'm happy to do that for you guys. But I would say, as we're going through these, as I'm going through the heat map, as I'm going through these entries, if there's a part of you that says, I really like the way that sounds, trust yourself. That's the whole point of the heat map, is to give you all of the information that you need to know to help you make those decisions. Don't wait for me to give you an answer. If you hear something you like and you're like, I love that, or I hate that, make that decision. I'm not going to be right 100% of the time, just to make sure we're clear on that. I'm wrong plenty. There's not a fantasy football analyst in the world who's isn't wrong plenty of the time. Okay. So just keep that in mind. The whole point of this heat map is to give you the information to help you say, I feel really good about this decision. I'm going with it. Okay. All right. What were we? Oh, Dolphins. Okay. Oh, yes. Dolphins, Patriots. So this was one where once I got to this game and it was time to write this game, I stopped what I was doing and went and made myself a pot of coffee because I'm like, I need some sort of pick me up to get me through this one. Dolphins, Patriots, generally speaking, is one that we want to avoid pretty much as possible, right? 36.5 point over under. Somehow that's not even the lowest. The Raiders and Broncos are even lower than that, but still 36.5 points. That suggests there's going to be very few touchdowns. And when there's very few touchdowns, there's very few fantasy points because you're relying on yardage at that point. And can we expect a lot of yardage from a Tyler Huntley Dolphins or a Jacoby Brissett Patriots? I don't think so. 36.5 point over under. Neither team is projected to score 20 points. Both teams have very low implied point totals, like way below average. It's just gross. There's nothing about this game that's exciting. Now, if we're desperate for optimism for Jalen Waddle, the matchup looks good. The Patriots are getting toasted by wide receivers, allowing the 6th most PPR points per game. Now, let's go look at Jalen Waddle himself in particular. Now, noteworthy, I do have Jalen Waddle in the meh column, but I do have him with a green dot, meaning he's closer to the feel-good column than the feel-gross column. I'm treating him as a boomer bust wide receiver 3/4 flex without Tua. He does have some matchup-based potential in week 5. Now, this is something I put in the heat map last week, and I want to repeat it again because I think it's worth noting for anybody who doesn't. Long story short, I spent a good amount of time digging through the box scores of Tyler Huntley starts in his career, just to see if there's any hope, any optimism for his pass catchers, his Tyreek Hill, his Jalen Waddle. TLDR, yes, there's definitely room and reason for optimism if you have Tyreek Hill, if you have Jalen Waddle. Now, I know last week wasn't pretty, and I'm not saying he's going to be the new Tua, but I do like Tyler Huntley more than I like Skylar Thompson, and here's why. Prior to last week, in 10 career games where Tyler Huntley threw the ball at least 17 times, he did not hesitate to pepper his top pass catchers with targets. 6 different pass catchers had 10 or more targets in 10 games. 7 if you count Justice Hill. Now, during those 10 games, 12 different pass catchers had 8 or more targets. During those 10 games, 12 different pass catchers had at least 10 PPR points, including 6 that scored 15 or more. Okay, so 6 wide receivers in 10 games scored 15 or more PPR points with Tyler Huntley. The very best performance was from Mark Andrews, who caught 10 of 13 targets, 136 yards, and 2 touchdowns, so over 35 PPR points. There was another game where Andrews caught 11 of 11 targets for 115 yards and 1 touchdown, over 28 PPR points. Now, Mark Andrews is the only player to score 20 or more PPR points with Tyler Huntley at quarterback, and he did it 2 different times. But the whole point is, while the quality of targets might not be terrific, there's at least hope for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle that they should at least get a chance to catch passes, right? With Skylar Thompson, they weren't even getting the ball. They just weren't even getting the throws. Tyler Huntley is a type of quarterback that you can say what you will about the quality of the targets, but historically, he has not hesitated to identify his top targets and throw it at them. Okay. So Tyreek and Jalen Waddle should get opportunities. Also, by the way, I don't know if you saw this earlier in the week, but Tua Tagovailoa has a chance to return as soon as week 8. Okay, so if you're hanging on to Tyreek Hill, if you're hanging on to Jalen Waddle, keep hanging on to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Tread water, find ways to win, because Tua could come back. And if that happens, Tyreek Hill's back to being a top 5 pick. Jalen Waddle's back to being a back-end second-round pick. Okay, so just hang in there a little while longer. Now, after 4 games, the Pats are getting smacked by wide receivers. They're allowing the 4th most catches, 5th most yards, 6th most PPR points, and they're giving up 37 plus PPR points per game to enemy wide receivers, all despite holding them to the 14th fewest touchdowns. So kind of like the Vikings, imagine what will happen once those catches and yards start to catch up to the Patriots and wide receivers start finding their way into the end zone. The Patriots are allowing the 6th most PPR points per game, and it could be a lot worse. 7 different wide receivers in 4 games have scored at least 10 PPR points against the Pats. Now, only 2 of them were able to eclipse 15 PPR points, but they did rocket all the way up to 28.9 and 23.7, both of which were in one game with DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith-Njigba. Now, in his first game with Tyler Huntley, Jalen Waddle caught 4 of 6 targets for 36 scoreless yards, 7.6 PPR points. Nothing exciting. He's averaging 7.6 PPR points and 5 targets per game in 2.5 games without Tua. That's a struggle. And we talked about what we don't like, and that's this game in particular. There's just not a lot to like about the Dolphins and the Patriots. The other thing that I'm going to say about this, by the way, is that the Dolphins Patriots has a very narrow spread. The Dolphins are underdogs, but only by 1.5. So that suggests a pretty neutral game script where neither team will want to throw the ball more than they have to. They're going to want to keep the ball on the ground. It's going to be Ramondre Stevenson versus Devon Achane as much as they can. They're also getting Raheem Mostert back. Point is, this isn't necessarily a game where we should be expecting 40 passing attempts from Tyler Huntley. They're going to limit his pass attempts as much as possible. So that's one thing we don't like about Jalen Waddle this week. And then Kareem Hunt is somebody we already talked about. Really, really like his we like his game script. We like his scrolling back down here. We like that he's 5.5 point favorites. We like that the Chiefs are projected to score 24.5 points. We don't like his matchup, but still, if you're looking for any sort of safety, CMAC, Kareem Hunt is going to be a much, much safer play, a higher floor, if you will, than Jalen Waddle and Keon Coleman. There's an argument to be made that there's some upside to Keon Coleman this week. Like if you're saying, hey, I can accept a 0, but I need to smash through the roof with a 20-point week, Keon Coleman's going to be your best chance at that, at a 25 point week, if he just goes nuts, goes wild. But if you're like, hey, I just need 10 points, 15 points, Kareem Hunt is going to be the way to go. Camden Bush wants to know, who should I start? Kareem Hunt, popular name this week. Jerome Ford or Javonte Williams? Ooh, man, I'm going to try and remove it's not a biased, but I do remember writing Javonte Williams' entry this week and saying to myself, if there's a week to use Javonte Williams, this is the week. I'm going to try and remove that from my brain, though, because there's some other solid options here. First, let me wet the whistle, if you will. Grab some caffeine and hop back over to the heat map. While I am hopping over to the heat map, just a reminder, I left this in the comment section. In fact, let me just paste it again. If you're liking what you're seeing from the week, this is the week 5 heat map. This is the resource that launched my entire business. It went viral on Reddit many years ago. It offers contextual analysis for every single player in every single game every week. There's 250 plus players in here. So if there's any player you want to know about, you double click on their name and it's going to give you everything you need to know. All right, let's get back to, where were we? Right here. Camden Bush, Kareem Hunt, Jerome Ford, Javonte Williams. All right, we talked about Kareem Hunt. We like Kareem Hunt this week. We like that we like his we don't like his matchup. We like his implied total. We like the spread. We like the volume he's going to get. What we don't like is the matchup. So there's a little bit of uncomfortability there. Jerome Ford, we talked about, and here's what's funny. As much as I write about 250 players a week, it's funny how you can mention a player and I'm like, what was his thing again? And that's why I created the heat map, so I could always come back to this one document and reference everything. Yes. We talked a little bit about Jerome Ford already. We don't like that the Cleveland Browns are underdogs. Generally speaking, that's not a great thing for running backs, although Jerome Ford is active in the passing game. It's just not something we love as much as we love Kareem Hunt being a 5.5 point favorite. The Commanders have historically been a good matchup for running backs. They're a good matchup for running backs this week. There's a lot to like about Jerome Ford. Now, the Browns have a much less implied total. They're only expected to score 20 points. The Chiefs are expected to score 24. I mean, the way the Commanders' offense has looked in recent weeks, I mean, the Browns' defense is terrific, but what if the Commanders jump all over the Browns? I don't know. And then Javonte Williams, again, it's been ugly, but if there's 1 week, if you had to pick 1 week to use Javonte Williams, this is probably the one. Now, the game itself, we're not loving the game itself, right? Raiders-Broncos has a lower over-under than Dolphins-Patriots. 35.5, that is nauseating. That suggests that neither team is going to score any touchdowns here might be defensive, like Gardner Minshew pick 6, Bo Nix pick 6. Bo Nix pick 6. That sucks for him that rhymes. But this game in particular is gross. Neither team is expected to score 20 points. The Broncos are expected to score 19 and still win by 2.5. But we do love. So what we love about Javonte Williams, is that the Broncos are favorites. They're favorites at home, meaning it's not the sort of thing where they're expected to get blown out. They're not going to have to abandon the run. They should be able to keep the football on the ground as much as they want to, which they want to. They want to limit Bo Nix's pass attempts. Okay, that's a good thing. Javonte Williams should get plenty of opportunities here. We also like the matchup because the Raiders are, on the surface, they're allowing the 8th most PPR points per game. Now, if we go look at Javonte Williams, this is game number 10. Javonte Williams is in the yellow column because he just hasn't been doing anything, but he does have a green dot, meaning I'm cautiously optimistic about Javonte Williams. He's an RB3/flex. There's script-based upside. When I say script, I mean the fact that they're 2.5 point favorites. There's matchup-based upside in week 5. Javonte Williams set a new season high in touches last week with 18, a new season high with scrimmage yards with 80, providing optimism that he's going to be plenty involved in this rare positive game script and good matchup. The Raiders are a good matchup for running backs. They're giving you the 15th most touches, 5th most catches, 8th most rushing yards, 12th most touchdowns, and 8th most PPR points per game to enemy running backs. This isn't anything that's new. This is a half decade that's been going on, not decade long. It hasn't been going on for 10 years, but it has been going on for 5 years now, where the Raiders have allowed the 9th most or more PPR points per game to opposing wide running backs in each of the last 4 seasons. 4 running backs in 4 games have scored 15 or more PPR points against the Raiders, including 22.9 from J.K. Dobbins in week 1, 27.9 from Chuba Hubbard in week 3. Basically, 1 running back per game is giving you at least 15 PPR points against the Raiders. Now, what we don't love is that Javonte Williams is averaging 13 touches per game. That's not terrific. It's not terrible, but it's not terrific. 52 plus scrimmage yards. He does not have a single touchdown yet. So theoretically, there's some positive touchdown regression coming when he's getting you 13 touches and 52 scrimmage yards per game, but he's only getting you 8.2 PPR points. His high this year is 11.5 PPR points in week 2, 10 PPR points in week 4, and he has 2 different games under 9 PPR points so far. In 5 career games against the Raiders, Javonte Williams is averaging just 10.7 PPR points per game, despite 13.4 touches per game. So right on par with what he's averaging this year. Now, he did score 20.5 points on 20 touches in week 18 just last year. So not even a full calendar year ago did he score 20 plus points. And we talked about the game, nauseating over under, very weak implied total. We talked about those things. Generally speaking, this is a week where I would feel good about Javonte Williams, or at least better than I usually do. Now, as for who to start, you can only choose one of these. This one is tough. This is one where I would defer to my fantasy football Discord server. And the Discord server, it's an online community. I like to think of it as an online army. We got 198 and counting fantasy football players, including myself, that are in here sorting through dilemmas just like this one. We're in, like Camden, they would post in the start sit channel in my Discord server and say, hey, which one should I start? And 198 fantasy football players would help each other with this very decision. I highly, highly, highly recommend joining the Basement Brood Fantasy Football Discord server. It costs less than 1 beer per month to join. It's just $4.99 per month to get in there. I just dropped a link for that in the comments if it's loading. I don't know if it's actually loading. I don't know. While that loads, it's time to make the decision. Now, if it were me, and I was making this decision of Kareem Hunt, Jerome Ford, or Javonte Williams, who would I pick? I would pick Kareem Hunt. Javonte Williams was definitely on the tip of my tongue, and I was about to say Javonte Williams. And at the last second, the Chiefs, no Rashee Rice. They could struggle to, they're not going to struggle to pass the ball. They got Patrick Mahomes, but I'm thinking once they get down into the red zone, which they should, they have a nice high implied point total of over 24.5 points. That automatically gives Kareem Hunt a chance to score touchdowns. He has a better chance of finding the end zone than any of the other running backs here, and I think that's what we're hoping for. All of these running backs have a good chance of 15 plus touches this week, but who has the best chance of finding the end zone? And that answer is Kareem Hunt. So that's who I would go with. So hopefully that helps. Oh, start two. Sorry, the very next comment that I didn't see until now was start two. So start two of Kareem Hunt, Jerome Ford, Javonte Williams. In this case, I'm going Kareem Hunt, and I'm rolling the dice on Javonte Williams. Jerome Ford is an underdog. You never know if Washington jumps on Cleveland. That could make it hard for Jerome Ford to get anything going. Kareem Hunt's locked in. I'm going to roll the dice on Javonte Williams. Bet on the Broncos to maintain positive game script and just feed them and give them a chance to finally fall into the end zone. All right. Smokey the Cat wants to know, hello, what player is best to stash? Don't they have any of their counterparts? Don't have any of their counterparts. And that's okay. By the way, myself, many of the folks in my fantasy football Discord server, Derek, if you're watching, are team no handcuff, meaning don't handcuff your running backs. You're only capping your own upside when you're rostering two running backs from the same team. There's some instances where it might make sense, where like there's some backfields where they're heavily running two running backs and you might be able to have two. But the best way to maximize your upside is to stash other teams' handcuffs. So I actually have in the heat map a tab here, streamers and stashes tabs. You can find defenses, kickers, tight ends, and quarterbacks to plug and play off of waivers. But over on the far end, I have running backs to stash. And of course, you can click to see you can click any name to see their notes over here in the heat map. But I usually list, typically from top to bottom in order of preference, who I would be looking to stash. These are running backs that I want to grab before kickoff. So before kickoff tomorrow or Sunday or whatever it is, hop onto your waiver wire, see if these guys are available, and stash them on your bench, because if the guy in front of them or their counterpart gets hurt, suddenly you just lucked into a RB2 that you can use moving forward, and you didn't have to play the whole waiver wire game. Now, the question specifically here is Ty Chandler, Trey Benson, Jalen Wright, or Isaac Guerrero? I love this question. This is a great question. Jalen Wright is not an option because what I'm looking for when I'm looking for these bench stashes is a guy who is going to come into instant RB2 volume with RB1 upside. Tyler Algier would be a great one if he's available. Like, he's probably not, but if he is, he's not doing enough to be an option on his own. But if anything happened to Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier is an instant RB2 with RB1 upside. Zach Charbonnet is another one. Jordan Mason was my favorite one before the season started. Shout out to everybody in the BBFF Discord server who we've been celebrating for 4 or 5 weeks because we've been banging the table on Jordan Mason. And then we weren't celebrating that Christian McCaffrey got hurt, but we were celebrating heavily drafting Jordan Mason in anticipation of that possibility. So many of us lucked into Jordan Mason, didn't have to play that waiver wire game. But out of these options, Ty Chandler, Trey Benson, and Isaac Guerrero, Jalen Wright is not one, because if anything happened to Devon Achane, Jalen Wright wouldn't just walk into 20 plus touches. He would still be split. He would still be second in line behind Raheem Mostert. So to me, it's between Chandler, Benson, and Guerrero. Now, I do have Chandler and Guerrero pretty close on the list. I have Chandler in here as well, or Trey Benson in here as well. Now, Ty Chandler, I have above Isaac Guerrero, and if I'm being honest, you could flip-flop those, because Isaac Guerrero is one injury away from becoming the new RB1 in a Kyle Shanahan offense, and we've seen how that's worked out for Jordan Mason. We saw how that worked out for Elijah Mitchell in the past. Like, you want that spot. You want the RB1 in a Kyle Shanahan offense. So you could make that argument, although I'm not 100% convinced that if anything happened to Jordan Mason, that Isaac Guerrero would just walk in and be the RB1 right away. Like, they've had Matt Breida on the practice squad in the past. He might still be on the practice squad. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the 49ers went and found somebody that they could bring in if something happened to Jordan Mason. And it sounds like Christian McCaffrey is going to try and make his recovery and make his way back to the football field soon-ish rather than later. So I'm not completely sold on the idea that Guarendo would suddenly be the next Jordan Mason. Whereas if Aaron Jones went down, Ty Chandler is pretty much locked into that RB1 role. He'd be an instant RB2 with RB1 upside because of how, here's the other part that I want to mention when I'm looking at these stashes, is I want running backs and offenses that are just generally good. Generally good. They're going to have positive game script. They're going to be winning more often than not. The Vikings offense has been awesome. Absolutely awesome. And if anything happened to Aaron Jones, Ty Chandler suddenly becomes an instant RB2 just based on volume alone. And then because of the offense he's in, there's RB1 upside. So Ty Chandler is very, very high at the top of this list. My answer here, Smokey, would be Ty Chandler. If I had my own team, if I could stash just one or the other, I'd be stashing Ty Chandler. Trey Benson's a great stash too, but it seems unlikely that the Cardinals would just make him the new James Conner because Amari DeMarcado has been involved with the team as their pass catching option. So he'd probably form some sort of committee. So to me, it's Ty Chandler because he's the most likely to just be an instant workhorse if anything happened to Aaron Jones. Pate says, thank you. No. Thank you, sir. Truly. Or ma'am. It could be ma'am. I don't know what Pate could mean a lot of different things. So sir, ma'am, friend. Thank you, friend. I really appreciate you being here, tuning in, asking questions. Astif Gop wants to know, who do you start, JSN, Wandale, or Wicks? Woo! Let me see here. Well, let's go to the heat map. Seahawks, Giants. Generally speaking, I like the Seahawks. They have a nice implied total of 25 points. That suggests no shortage of touchdowns. There should be touchdowns. Now, the spread is 6.5, and I have not updated the spread since last night. Malik Neighbors is officially out, meaning this spread might be going, Devin Singletary, I don't know where we're at with him. The spread might be going in the wrong direction for the Giants. They might be up to 7, maybe even 8 at this point, probably more 7. Again, that's not drastic enough. It's not like the Seahawks won't throw the football in the second half at all, but it is a large enough spread to suggest the Seahawks won't need to throw 40 times or 50 times like they did last week to keep up with the Giants. They should be able to play ahead of the Giants. This projects as much more of a Kenneth Walker game than it does a Geno Smith, DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith, and Jigba game. Now, that's not to scare you off of JSN. The dude's getting a ton of targets. He's a great play. It's just not the sort of thing where, A, we're not expecting a shootout, and B, we're not really expecting the Giants to be all that competitive in this game. So the question is, how much will the Seahawks need JSN? Okay. Now, at the individual level, this is game number 12. Popping down here. Oop. Sorry if that was really loud. Jackson Smith and Jigba, I have them in column C with the yellow dot that just says meh. Usually that suggests, there's just not much to the data that suggests he's going to have a bad week or a good week. It's just kind of a meh type of situation. I'm treating him as a boomer bust wide receiver 3. There is some foreseeable downside if the Seahawks just quite simply don't need to throw the ball in week 5. It's been a bit of a roller coaster for JSN. He is averaging over 8 targets, 6 catches, 56 yards, and 11.9 PPR points per game. And he's doing that while not scoring any touchdowns yet. There should be a touchdown or 2 coming sooner than later. Now, the Giants are mediocre against wide receivers so far. They're allowing the 15th most catches and the 6th most touchdowns, but they're also holding wide receivers to the 10th fewest yards and 15th fewest PPR points per game. Justin Jefferson, Amari Cooper, and CeeDee Lamb all did manage to score 15-plus PPR points against the Giants. CeeDee Lamb scored 23, more than 23. Amari Cooper scored more than 23. Both of those happened in the last 2 games, so the Giants are reeling a little bit. But the Seahawks also have DK Metcalf. They have Tyler Lockett. JSN's as good a bet as those guys, but those guys are also involved to be the guys who boom if anybody booms against the Giants as a wide receiver. Now, JSN has been a bit boomer bust this year, and I think it's important that people recognize that, yes, he is averaging, right? Averages are important, but they're not everything. JSN is technically averaging 8.3 targets per game, but he had just 2 or 3 targets in weeks 1 and 3. So in weeks 1 and 3, he had either 2 targets or 3 targets. But he had 12 or 16 targets in weeks 2 and 4. The same thing goes with points. He had fewer than 7 PPR points in both weeks 1 and 3, but he had 13 plus PPR points in weeks 2 and 4. So he's been boom or bust as an option, and that's probably not going to change because the Seahawks have so many. Like, they have DK Metcalf, they have Tyler Lockett. Theoretically, they have Noah Fant, they have Kenneth Walker. There's a lot of places they can go with the football. So there's some boom bust to JSN, and JSN is typically the type of wide receiver, because he's boom bust, that I would want to use in situations where we know the Seahawks will probably need to throw the ball a lot. So in a shootout or in a game where they're expected to lose, those are the games where I'd want to fire up JSN. Games like this, where the Seahawks are 6.5, possibly 7-point favorites, they should be able to ride Kenneth Walker. Those are the weeks where I wouldn't feel as great about JSN as I could or usually would. Now, we go over to Wan'Dale Robinson. Sticking with the same game. Now, this is kind of interesting, right? Because this is kind of the opposite, right? The Giants don't have Malik Neighbors. That is, do I have him in here? I do. Malik Neighbors is, where's his number here? He's averaging, there it is, 15 targets over the last 3 games. 15 targets are now missing from the Giants passing attack. They need to find a new home. Wan'Dale Robinson is the obvious number one beneficiary, although it does bring guys like Darius Slayton into play, Jalen Hyatt, Theo Johnson. Those are guys that could benefit from Malik Neighbors missing time, but there's 15 targets up for grabs. And up to this point, Wan'Dale Robinson's been the other guy in that Giants passing attack. Now, because Malik Neighbors won't play, like I mentioned, the Giants are probably closer to 7-point underdog. I should just look it up, but 7-point underdogs at this point. Wan'Dale Robinson has already been averaging, where is it? Yeah, 9.5 targets per game. Wan'Dale's already getting you nearly 10 targets, 7 catches, just, under 49 yards. He's getting you about 13.2 PPR points per game after 4 contests, which is way better than I think a lot of people realize. So he's already getting you about 10 targets per game. Now Malik Neighbors and his 15 targets are going to be won't play. Like this could be a massive. Let me just rewind for a second. Wan'Dale's getting you nearly 10 targets. Malik Neighbors is missing. That's 15 additional targets, not necessarily for Wan'Dale, but more targets for Wan'Dale's plate. And the Giants are 7-ish point underdogs, meaning they are going to have to throw the ball to stay competitive, try and catch up to the Seahawks, et cetera, et cetera. Wan'Dale could get a ton of targets in this game. Okay. There's a lot that's working in his favor. Now, this is a really good example of when I mentioned you have to look a little bit deeper, right? On the surface, you'll see that the Seattle Seahawks look really tough against wide receivers. They're ranked 27th against wide receivers. They're holding them to the 6th fewest PPR points per game. That sounds bad. That looks bad. But double click on Wan'Dale's name and read a little bit closer. The Seahawks look like a formidable foe for wide receivers when you see that they're holding them to the 7th fewest catches, 5th fewest yards, 14th fewest touchdowns, and 6th fewest PPR points per game. But this is where that additional context comes into play, and this is why the heat map exists. While they've been good at the team level against wide receivers, their resume this year includes Broncos wide receivers in Bo Nix's first start in the NFL. Kind of an easy matchup, if you will. Then they got the Patriots, who barely have warm bodies playing wide receiver. And then they got the Dolphins with Skylar Thompson playing quarterback. And then they got the Lions. And Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams promptly torched them for 16 PPR points each. Okay? So they look tough on the surface, but that's because they haven't played anybody except the Lions, who instantly put up 32 plus PPR points against them as wide receivers. Okay? Point is, the matchup for Wan'Dale Robinson, probably not as scary as it looks on the surface. So you're taking a negative game script that implies the Giants are going to have to throw the ball more than they would like to. You're taking Wan'Dale Robinson, a guy who's already getting you about 10 targets per game. Malik Neighbors frees up 15 targets per game. And the Seahawks probably aren't as tough of a matchup as they look. Wan'Dale Robinson, it's gross. It doesn't feel right, but Wan'Dale Robinson is a wide receiver 3 with some actually pretty sneaky upside in week 5. Who was the last one? Oh, Dontavian Wicks. All right, so we talked a little bit about Wicks just in general, but specifically for this week, like there's no sugarcoating. It is sugar-coated. It's fully sugar-coated. There is a lot to love about Dontavian Wicks in week 5, and Jaden Reed and Romeo Doubs. Some of one or two of those guys are going to have a day. Packers Rams in general, that's a game that we want to target. 48.5 point over under. Both teams have projected totals over 22 points. Both teams have above average implied point totals. Both teams are sporting defenses that have been getting wrecked in fantasy football. Like the best defensive number we see here is that the Packers are giving up the 16th most points per game to running backs. That's the best defensive number we see in this game. You look at Dontavian Wicks specifically. We'll look at game number 11. I'm approaching him as a boomer bust wide receiver 3/flex with shootout enhanced upside. The Packers have a strong implied total of 25.75 points. By the way, that is the second most among all 28 teams on the week 5 slate. The Packers are expected to score more points than all but one team this week. Points come from touchdowns. Touchdowns create fantasy football points. Talked about the over under. Feeling great about that. The Rams have allowed the 13th most or more PPR points per game to enemy wide receivers in each of the last 3 seasons. They've been struggling for 3+ years now against wide receivers. Christian Watson is going to miss the next few weeks, which adds more target potential to the plate of Packers pass catchers. Now, in the 4 games that Christian Watson did not play last year, between weeks 14 and 18, Dontavian Wicks averaged 5+ targets, 4 catches, 51+ yards, 0.8 touchdowns. So he had 3 touchdowns in 4 games, and he averaged 13.7 PPR points per game in that 4-game window. He scored fewer than 11 PPR points in 2 of them, but also 15 or more PPR points in 2 of them. So very, very boom bust. He scored 24.1 points in week 18. He's as boom bust as it gets in the Green Bay Packers pass catching core. So you got Jaden Reed, who's just a consistent option. Romeo Doubs, who's a low floor, low ceiling option. And then you got, or a high floor, low ceiling option. And then you got Dontavian Wicks, who's a low floor, high ceiling option. Last week alone, after Christian Watson went down, Dontavian Wicks racked up an absurd 13 targets. He only caught 5 of them, but he had 13 targets, 78 yards, 2 touchdowns, and nearly 25 PPR points. The Rams are middle of the pack against wide receivers. They're holding them to the 8th fewest catches, but they're otherwise allowing the 14th most yards, 2nd most touchdowns, and 10th most PPR points. 3 different wide receivers, Jamison Williams, Marvin Harrison, and Juwan Jennings, have scored 24 or more PPR points against the Rams this season, which includes a ridiculous 46.5 points from Juwan Jennings in week 3. If you'll recall, just 2 weeks ago, Juwan Jennings went absolutely crazy. Now, that being said, those 3 guys are the only ones that were able to hit 12 PPR points against the Rams this year. Amon-Ra St. Brown didn't. Brandon Ayuk didn't. DJ Moore didn't. Keenan Allen didn't. Roma Dunza didn't. All of those guys actually scored fewer than 12, although we should cut Amon-Ra St. Brown some slack and Brandon Ayuk some slack, because part of the reason that they didn't score 12 is because Jamison Williams and Juwan Jennings were going nuts. So anyways, there's a lot to love about Dontavian Wicks this week. To answer this question, it's a question of safety or upside. If you're just looking for guaranteed, which there's no such thing, if you're looking for a safer bet to give you some fantasy football points, Wan'Dale Robinson is going to be the play, especially if it's PPR. If it's not PPR, Wan'Dale's not that exciting of a play because he's not getting a lot of yards on his catches. He's just getting a lot of catches. Wan'Dale Robinson is going to be a little bit like he could be an absolute target hog in week 5. Like he could get 15 targets. Not exaggerating. He could get 15 targets. If you're aiming for absolute upside, if you want to swing for the fences and try and knock it out of the park, it's Wicks. But if you're playing Wicks, you have to be prepared to stomach a dud. You have to be prepared to stomach a 3, 4, 5 point game. So if you want to swing for the fences and go for that 20-pointer, it's Wicks. But again, there's some risk there. He's a very boom bust type of option. If it were me and I have to make this decision, I'm a guy who swings for the fences. And in a vacuum here, there's just so much upside to Dontavian Wicks' game that I'd be going with that one. I'd be going with Wicks. All right. 130. I'm going to try and rapid fire some of these. It's so hard for me to rapid fire, but we're going to give it a shot here. Wait, what was your question? Okay. Well, man, I don't even know what your question was here, guy. It said, all right, I traded Laporta and Wilson for DK. I had Rice and AJ Brown. Also did the same in another league. Chase B, Wicks, and Wilson. I got DK in both. I don't see a question here. It seems like you just did some trades. So congrats. Hopefully it works out. I don't know. All right. Jason Vargas, what do we got here? Start 2, half PPR. Brandon Ayuk, Michael Pittman, JSN, Waddle, or Wandale? Oh, man, that's a lot. Okay, start 2, half PPR. Let me just remind myself what we're dealing with the 49ers. 49ers Cardinals. I think there's some shootout potential there. Ayuk is going to get his at some point. It's just a very, very uncomfortable play right now. It's just one of those sort of things where we know a big day is coming. We just don't know when. If the Cardinals can keep up with the 49ers, there's some shootout potential there. The matchup looks good. Pittman is really hard to get excited about anytime that Anthony Richardson's the quarterback, just because he's not like here. I'm not going to dig too deep into these because I'm trying to go rapid fire, but where was it? After 3 games with Anthony Richardson, here we go. This is what I was looking for. Michael Pittman has scored fewer than 8 PPR points in 4 of 5 full games that he's played with Anthony Richardson this year. So it's like, we knew this was coming, right? Anthony Richardson's a run first, or he's a run heavy, not run first, but run heavy quarterback. They want to feed Jonathan Taylor, who won't be playing this week. So there might be more inclination to put the ball in the air. So there's some upside there. This game has some shootout potential. The Jaguars are a good matchup. There's a lot to like about Michael Pittman if Anthony Richardson would just throw him the ball. Then we got JSN, who we talked about. I love JSN as a player. I just don't necessarily love his setup this week. Waddle is super uncomfortable. You have better options. I wouldn't even consider him. If I have to pick 2, I would likely be rolling the dice on Ayuk and Pittman here. Those would none of these feel particularly comfortable, but if it were me, I'd be going with Brandon Ayuk and Michael Pittman. Would I trade Malik Neighbors for Amon-Ra St. Brown? Man, wild that we're even asking this question, eh? But I mean, Malik Neighbors is getting 15 targets per game. Insane. But no, I'd stick with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I would not. I mean, Dynasty's a different story. But if we're just talking this year, it's hard to. I would just stick with the stud wide receiver in the great offense, which is Detroit. I'd just stick with Amon-Ra there. But man, 15 targets per game. Wabbit wants to know, full PPR, need 1 flex. Kraft? No, I wouldn't. You got better options here. I wouldn't be flexing a tight end. So I do love Tucker Kraft, but there's better options here. Jalen Waddle, Stevenson, and Jennings. So Jennings is, to me, he's basically back to the bench. If Debo, Ayuk, and Kittle are healthy, that's just, I'm not even considering Jennings, just quite frankly. I understand. I think he scored a touchdown last week, and he had a big catch last week, and he's still involved. That usage is going to dwindle more and more as time goes on. I wouldn't be looking at a tight end here, unless it was like one of the stud tight ends. Waddle, we talked about, there's some optimism there in general, but there's just not much to like about that game. On the flip side, I actually really like Ramondre Stevenson this week. Yes, there's definitely red flags and the possibility that the Patriots start and go with Antonio Gibson, like if you're going to consider Ramondre Stevenson this week, you have to be prepared to stomach the possibility that the Patriots don't use him and they try and teach him a lesson. He could be in the doghouse. He has 4 fumbles in 4 games. There's risk there, big time risk. But if they give him one more chance, all of the stars align for a really nice week. The Patriots are favored, which isn't the case very frequently. They have a really nice matchup. They have a chance to keep the ball on the ground. There's a lot to like about Ramondre Stevenson this week. That's the route I would be going. Again, you have to be prepared to stomach a 0, but you could be prepared to stomach a 0 with all of these guys. None of these guys are safe, good bets, and Ramondre Stevenson is the best bet out of that batch. LeVar Ball wants to know, PPR, do I go with Brandon Ayuk or Dontavian Wicks? Opponent kicker already has 17 on me. Man, isn't that the worst? That's the worst. I need as much upside as possible. See, that's really, really good to know. Dontavian, oh, man. The data here would suggest that Wicks actually has bigger upside only because the Packers-Rams game looks like it could go back and forth with both teams scoring a ton of points. The 49ers-Cardinals game suggests that the Cardinals might fail to remain competitive. And if that's the case, the 49ers are just going to just run Jordan Mason as much as they possibly can. And even if they don't, they have Deebo Samuel, they have Jordan Kittle. That's not necessarily an advantage for Wicks because the Packers have Dobbs and all those guys. As much upside as possible, I would say, is Wicks because he has that 10-plus target potential. He has a good matchup. He has a possible shootout, a back-and-forth type of scenario. Here's the thing, though. I will say that I would feel good about both of those. Like, it's not like you're taking a player, putting him in your lineup, and like, God, I really don't want to use this player, but I have no other options. I would feel good about having both those guys. But if it was me and I need to maximize upside, I'd be going Wicks, which is wild to say. Jonathan Santiago, need to sit one between Worthy, Wicks, and JSN. Also, if Brian Robinson is out, start one between Javonte, Justice Hill, or Antonio Gibson. Okay, need to sit one between Worthy, Wicks, and JSN. Worthy. Who do the Chiefs play? Oh, the Saints. Yeah, I mean, there's some. I'd probably just sit. Dude, I don't want to tell you to sit JSN. There's just not a lot that I like about JSN's matchup this week in part. Like, I shouldn't say matchup, setup. There's not much that I like about the way the game sets up, but I wouldn't want to have Wicks on my bench. I wouldn't want to. You could wait and see with Xavier Worthy this week because the Chiefs have a nice. Like, are we suddenly expecting Xavier Worthy to get 8+ targets like Rashee Rice did? Probably not. It's, Travis Kelce should get more targets. Juju could be involved. I think if you have to sit one of those guys, Worthy is probably the safer one to sit because there's still plenty of uncertainty there. Again, that's a good problem to have. I would hate having one of those guys on my bench, which means you're at least going to get to use 2 of them. Brian Robinson is out, start one between Javonte, Justice Hill, or Gibson. Justice Hill, who do the Ravens? Oh, the Bengals. That's going to be a shootout. I don't mind that. Gibson, there's still so much uncertainty there. Gibson's not an option. I would just go with Javonte. There's much more quote unquote guaranteed volume there. So hopefully that helps. All right. Whew, man, guys, I can't tell you how much I appreciate all of these questions. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to all these, but I really, really appreciate this. Tent wants to know flex half PPR, Kareem Hunt, Josh Downs, Tank Dell. Kareem Hunt, Josh Downs. So between those two, I'd be going with Kareem Hunt, especially half PPR, and Tank Dell. Tank Dell, Texans play the Bills. That's right. That one's a pretty game. Not a great matchup, but definitely a great game environment. Great over-under, great implied total. Should be plenty of back and forth there. If you need to swing for the fences and go maximum upside, go with Tank Dell. If you want to go with safety and just get a couple points, go with Kareem Hunt. Okay? Hopefully that helps. Should I trade away Terry McLaurin, Chuba Hubbard, and receive Tyreek? Oh man, if you have a decent risk tolerance and you can stomach the possibility that Tua does not return, then don't do it. Or sorry, if you can stomach that, then do it. Because there's a chance that Tua's coming back after the next 3 games. He might be back in week 8. And if that's the case, you have a top 5 player in Tyreek Hill. And Terry McLaurin, we're going to see plenty of ups and downs with Terry McLaurin, with Jaden Daniels. Not because of Jaden Daniels as a quarterback, but because of the style of that offense. They want to run the ball as much as they can. And we saw that in the first couple of weeks where Terry McLaurin was getting no targets. He's going to have good games, but he's also going to have some clunkers. Chuba Hubbard has been awesome. Eventually, Jonathan Brooks is going to be in there and throw a wrench in that rotation. It's risky, super risky. And Roadhouse, I don't know what your record is. Like if you can't stomach a couple losses, like you need to be prepared to accept 1, 2, 3 losses in the next couple weeks. But if you can stomach that's a big upside play to be able to stash away Tyreek Hill if Tua comes back. All right. Should I start Keon Coleman in a 12-man PPR league? 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and a flex. Yeah. Should you? I don't know. It depends on what's available. I would say I wouldn't feel great about having Keon Coleman in my lineup. Although, as we talked a little about earlier, this week is a shootout. There's going to be no Khalil Shakir. It's like, and it's a good matchup. So if there was a week between weeks 1 and 5 that you roll the dice on Keon Coleman, this would be the one. All right. Juan wants to know Chuba or Swift. I got to remind myself. Oh, the Bears. Oh, yeah, they're playing each other. This one is so tough because Swift was obviously awesome last week, but it was the only week that he was not bad. But man, the Bears are favored by 3.5. The Panthers are getting absolutely trounced by running backs. They're giving up the second most PPR points per game to enemy running backs. They're getting smashed by running backs. 6 running backs in 4 games have scored 12 or more PPR points against the Bears. Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams. Oh, no, not against the Bears. The Panthers. Good thing I caught that. Against Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, J.K. Dobbins, Madison, Chase Brown, Zach Moss. All of those guys scored 12 or more. 4 have scored 17 or more. Chuba has been awesome, but it's really hard to not go with DeAndre Swift here because they are favored. The matchup is great. They should give him a chance to continue running his butt off as he has been. Anyway, that's a really tough call, especially because Chuba's been getting a ton of targets, but DeAndre Swift had 7 targets last week. If it were me, I'd be going with DeAndre Swift. I can say that with confidence that if I was staring at my lineup right now and I had to make this decision, I'd be going with DeAndre Swift. So hopefully that helps. GQ, my friend, I will see you in the Discord and I will see you in there relatively soon. Jay wants to know, traded Pacheco and Rachaad White for 31%. Oh, traded Pacheco plus Rachaad White plus 31% fab for Achane. I'm 1-3. What do you think? Making the move makes Rachaad White and 31% I'm fine with. Making the move makes sense because you're 1-3 and you need guys that can play now. Pacheco can't help you now. And like I said, if Tua Tagovailoa comes back in week 8, that's going to send that whole offense through the moon, and it's going to put Achane back on the map as a week-winning running back. I'm fine with this trade. I don't love losing Pacheco with that other stuff, But I'm totally fine with this trade. Totally fine with it. Freddie wants to know, would I drop Rome Odunze for Juwan Jennings or Trey Tucker rest of season? I would not drop Rome Odunze for. I definitely wouldn't drop him for Juwan Jennings. I wouldn't drop him for Trey Tucker either. Trey Tucker's been balling over the last 2 weeks. Devontae Williams is out the door. Trey Tucker's about to become a full-time player in that offense, but we're talking about the number 2 option in a Gardner Minshew, Aiden O'Connell offense. Trey Tucker is also he's not a gadget player, but he's not a like big upside touchdown scorer, anything like. Let's put it this way: when you look at the ceilings, Rome Odunze's ceiling is massive, absolutely massive. If things break right for him, like if anything were to happen to DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Trey Tucker might be a better like consistent, steady floor, but will his floor be high enough for you to use him over your other wide receiver options? And that's something that only you would know. But if it were me, just looking at this in a vacuum, I'd be hanging on to Rome and not going with those other guys. Joshua wants to know, trade dilemma, Zay Flowers plus Isaiah Likely for Brock Bowers and $20 of fab. So I got to tell you, the fab thing means nothing to me, not in that it's not important, but because I don't know anything about your league. I don't know how much $20 is worth in your league. I have K. Dotton as my current starter, and I have 4 good receivers in a full PPR, man. Okay, gotcha. So just looking at this in a vacuum, Flowers plus Likely is too much for Bowers. Likely plus Bowers is pretty. Oh, well, the trick that I'm running into here, Joshua, is that I don't know what that $20 is worth in your league. Is it worth a lot? Is it a little? Is it useless? Like, so to me, I'm having this tendency of just kind of ignoring it so that it looks like it's Flowers plus Likely for Bowers. After the first 2 weeks, Brock Bowers was looking like the only sure thing tight end in football. But then after the last 2 weeks, he's looking like he's just following the trend of all the other tight ends at this point. So I don't love that trade because Zay Flowers is the clear wide receiver 1 in Baltimore when they actually do throw the football. But I also don't think it's like terrible. I think it's balanced enough that if you did it, it's not the sort of thing that either side is getting fleeced. I think it's totally fine for both sides, but in a vacuum, I would rather have the Flowers plus Likely side of this, if that helps. C-Max says, appreciate it, man. I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much. Addie wants to know, hey, bro, purchase the heat map for this week. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate that. Great tool. Chuba, James Conner, Brian Thomas, and Chris Olave. Start 2. Okay. There's a lot of names here. Let me think. Chuba, James Conner, Cardinals play the 49ers. Oh, I don't like that. They're 7.5 point underdogs. That's a massive red flag. Although James Conner is involved in the passing game more often than not, so he could rack up some catches there. And then who else? Brian Thomas. Brian Thomas looks like an absolute stud. Possible shootout with the Colts. Great matchup. Jaguars could be throwing the ball. I like Brian Thomas a lot. I would have him locked in there. And then Chris Olave. Saints. Who do the Saints play? Oh, the Chiefs. Tough matchup, but they're going to be throwing the ball. They're going to be trying to catch up to the Chiefs. Addie, I don't know if you're in the Discord server because everybody uses screen names, and I don't actually know who's who, which is kind of wild. If you're in the Discord server, drop this one in the Start Sit channel. I'm curious to see what the other 198 fantasy football players say about this. And I personally would like to take more time to look at this the way I have with other questions. I just can't do that right now because I'm trying to go rapid fire. But off the top of my head, just choosing 2 here, Brian Thomas, I would love to put into my fantasy football lineup this week. It's hard to ignore him. And honestly, I would go with Chris Olave. I think the Saints are going to be throwing the ball. They're going to be trying to keep up with the Chiefs. They're not just going to be able to sit on it. Chris Olave is finally picking it up in terms of targets. Tons of talent there. Man, it's really hard to put a guy like James Conner on the bench because he's one of the few running backs in football that gets a ton of volume, but being 7.5 point underdogs against the 49ers is not necessarily a recipe for success for a running back. Although, again, James Conner does get catches. He just hasn't been getting catches lately. So off the top of my head, I'd be going with Brian Thomas and Chris Olave. But again, Addy, if you're in our Discord server, definitely drop this one in the start sit and feel free to tag me so that I respond to it. All right. Man, guys, I appreciate how many questions there are. I'm starting to be like, I don't know if I'll be able to answer everybody at least. I'm trying to answer everybody at least one time. Griffin wants to know, my bench is trash. Samaje Perine, Gus Edwards, Ray Davis, Jaleel McLaughlin, Tank Bigsby. That's a great stash, by the way. Josh Downs. Who can I drop for CEH? Who can I drop to? Oh, so you want to add these guys? CEH, I would definitely grab. If he's available anywhere, grab Clyde Edwards-Helaire. In fact, I saw on Yahoo that he's still IR eligible, so you might be able to just hide him and stash him on IR. Definitely check that out. I wouldn't be rostering Vidal over any of these other guys. I wouldn't be rostering Emmanuel Wilson over any of these guys. Jalen Polk is worth picking up if you see yourself needing wide receiver help. He's worth picking up, but other than if you can picture him in your starting lineup, pick up Polk. If not, though, there's going to be so much inconsistency with that Patriots offense that I don't think Polk is somebody that needs to be added. Pearsall is a great prospect. He's somebody I would want in Dynasty, but I can't see him being super useful in 2024 redraft leagues while Debo, Ayuk, and Kittle are healthy. And Audric Estime, that's somebody that you could possibly stash on IR right now as well. So just keep that in mind. But if you had to drop one of these guys, I wouldn't drop Samaje. I wouldn't drop Gus. I don't like dropping Ray Davis. I wouldn't drop Jaleel. He's still plenty involved. Bigsby, don't drop. That's one of the better. Oh, dude, I don't want to drop any of these. If I had to choose one, I would choose Samaje Perine, only because he got leapfrogged by Kareem. Like, he never got the chance to be the next guy. And Clyde has a better chance of being the next guy than Samaje does. So he's the guy that I would drop. If you wanted to drop another one, Ray Davis would be my next choice. Although I love Ray Davis, I wouldn't be trying to drop him either. But that would be my choice if I had to. U428 says potential trade, half PPR, trading away JSN, okay, plus Najee for ETN and Wan'Dale Robinson. I would definitely not do that. My other running backs are Ford, Jonathan Taylor, Rico Dowdle. Wide receivers are Brown. I don't know which Brown. AJ Brown, I'm guessing. Chris Olave, Malik Neighbors. The wide receivers are great, but I don't like this trade. I would much rather have the JSN and Najee side. Najee is one of those guys that eventually it's going to pop. I'm not saying he's going to go off and become Christian McCaffrey, but the guy has 0 touchdowns. That's going to change. He's not going to go through the whole season getting 20 plus touches a game and not scoring touchdowns. He's going to start getting you 15-point weeks at some point, hopefully this week. So hang in there. If anything, I'd be trying to buy Najee Harris, not sell Najee Harris. Now, ETN is kind of the opposite. ETN, let me pop this up real quick. I think this is definitely noteworthy. A lot of people like ETN because he was the number 3 RB in fantasy football last year. He was terrific down the first 9 games, but where is it? Here we go. Travis Etienne is now averaging just 12.8 PPR points per game and 15.7 touches per game over his last 13 contests dating back to last year. So almost a full fantasy football season, 13 straight games. He's averaging fewer than 12.8 PPR points per game, which is not that high of an upgrade compared to where Najee Harris has been this year. And Najee Harris has not reached his full potential yet. So you're potentially downgrading at wide receiver and breaking even-ish at running back. Don't get me wrong, I would take ETN over Najee Harris, but not by as big of a gap as you might think. I'm somebody who would much rather, I'm one of those guys stashing Tank Bigsby because the Jaguars are last week, Tank Bigsby and Travis Etienne had very, very similar touch counts, if not even. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was almost like a 50-50 split. I would not be trying to make a trade for Travis Etienne, and I'd be closer to buying Najee Harris than I would be selling. I would not do that trade. That's me. That's the big thing with all of this, guys. This is what I would do if I was in this situation, but you're in this situation. So do what you want to do. I'm just telling you what I would do if it was me. Feel free to drop this in the trades channel in my Discord server if you want other opinions. KJ says, is Noah Gray a good sneaky tight end play for this week, full PPR? I wouldn't be considering Noah Gray if Travis Kelce's healthy, unless you're in some sort of like really deep league and you need somebody. I think there's a lot of better options out there if you're looking for a streamer. I have tons of streamers on the streamers and stashes tab of the heat map. Tyler Conklin, Cade Otton, who already went, Tucker Kraft, Cole Kmet, Dalton Schultz. There's lots of names here. Noah Gray wouldn't be the one that I'm considering there. All right. Ryan DeVos wants to know, hey, Saquon Barkley is on bye, and I picked up Kareem Hunt and Trey Sermon. Who should I start? So I would just be going with Kareem Hunt here. Trey Sermon has a much, much better matchup, but he's just not a good fantasy. He's just not a good NFL running back. And anybody who makes the NFL is good. I shouldn't say he's not good. Results have not been great for Trey Sermon, and I detailed that in my heat map. I'll pop it up here for a quick second here. Trey Sermon. In 4 career games where Trey Sermon handled anywhere between 11 and 19 touches. So the 4 career games that he handled fantasy relevant volume. He averaged a pathetic 8.9 PPR points per game he handled nearly 15 touches, but didn't even score 9 PPR points per game. So he has not been great. In the 2 games where Trey Sermon handled 7, there have been 2 games in his career, small sample size, but there have only been 2 games in Trey Sermon's career where he handled 17 to 19 touches and he failed to reach 9 PPR points in either game. Now, as bad as the Jaguars have been against running backs who Trey Sermon's going against, they're holding them to the 7th fewest rushing yards, which is problematic because that is where Trey Sermon will need to butter his bread. He's not going to be a threat in the passing game, more likely than not. So he has a great matchup. The Jaguars aren't great against running backs, but he's just not a super effective running back. And we have it's entirely possible that Goodson gets involved and they'll probably call Evan Hull up from the practice squad if they haven't already. He's not like this guaranteed sure play. I am treating him like a low end RB2, a high end RB3 flex. But I would much rather just go with Kareem Hunt in a more difficult matchup than Trey Sermon. I do like Trey Sermon as a plug and play. So you did a good job grabbing him with Barkley on bye. But if you already have Kareem Hunt, I would just roll with him. Truly TJ wants to know, oh my gosh, this comment is from, I'm sorry guys. There's no way I'm going to be able to get to everybody. This comment is from about an hour ago. Which is awesome. I really appreciate this. I just got offered T. Higgins and Zach Moss. Dude, that profile picture is terrifying. T. Higgins and Zach Moss for Mike Evans. Do I accept? Man. Listen, I've been banging the table for T. Higgins all summer. Think he was drafted way too low in leagues this year. He averages over 15 PPR points per game, even with Jamar Chase in the lineup. He's starting to get the targets. He's going to pop at some point. And then you're getting Zach Moss basically for free out of it. I'm totally fine with taking the trade. Again, this is one of those things where you need to keep your own league, your own team, your own roster, all of those things in mind. I don't know who you have at running back, wide receiver. I don't know what your waiver pool looks like. I don't know how the scoring works. But in a vacuum, just looking at this information given, I'm fine with this trade. I love T. Higgins. I love Mike Evans, but I love T. Higgins, and then you're getting Zach Moss for free. All right. Oh, man. Mahad, I don't remember if I caught one of yours, so let's give it a shot here. Justin Fields or Geno? Steelers play who? Oh, Cowboys. Steelers play the Cowboys. Let me just look here. Decent matchup. Not necessarily a huge implied total. I mean, this one's... That one's pretty tough. First and foremost, I would potentially consider, I don't know if these guys are available in your leagues, like Trevor Lawrence, Matthew Stafford. Those are guys that I would look at streaming this week. But Geno and Fields are right up there. I do have Geno just slightly ahead of Fields. Fields feels a little bit safer just given his rushing ability. And he also offers a massive ceiling because of his rushing ability. We saw what he could do last week. I would feel better about having Justin Fields in my lineup this week than I would feel about having Geno Smith in my lineup this week. Hope that helps. And if you ever want details, like deeper details, always just double click on the name of any player in the heat map, and it's going to tell you exactly what to expect from that player in that week. All right. Ashley says, I just blew all of my fab on Dontavian Wicks, but now might have to bench him for Akers and Sermon. Yeah, I mean, Wicks is definitely a nice add. I don't know if I would have used all of it, but again, I don't know anything about your league either. Might have to bench him for Akers and Sermon. So I think you're asking to basically choose. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm fine with that. I don't love Akers this week against the Bills. I don't love Sermon as a player. I do like him against the Jaguars. I do like him as a plug and play. I'd probably go Sermon over Akers if that helps. But man, there's so much upside to Wicks this week. I wouldn't want him to be on my bench. Axmax wants to know, start 3, Wandale, Amari, Garrett, Deontay, Tank, and Brian Thomas. Oh my gosh, that's so many. Again, this is one where I highly recommend cruising through the heat map and reading the entry for all of these players to help you confidently make this decision. Start 3. What do we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 3 have to sit down. That's another way to look at it. Amari Cooper. Browns play. Why am I blanking on who the Browns play? Where are they? Oh, the Commanders. Oh, yeah. Commanders are historically bad against wide receivers. It's hard to bench Amari Cooper in that situation. It's hard to bench Garrett Wilson. It's hard to bench Deontay Johnson because Deontay Johnson is getting a ton. I think you got to go with the target volume here. Like a mix of the target volume plus talent plus offense. Dang, this is a really good problem to have. This is a really tough one because there's a ton of upside to Tank Dell this week, a ton of upside to Brian Thomas this week. Neither guy as much of a quote unquote sure thing as some of these other guys, but I would be man. If it was me and I had to start 3 here, I would be going with Garrett Wilson for sure. I could not leave Garrett Wilson on the bench this week. Who do the Panthers play? Oh, the Bears. Seventh fewest PPR points per game. Panthers not going to score a lot of points, but Deontay is getting so many passes right now. Like he had another, 13.5 targets per game with Andy Dalton. That's really tough to leave on the bench. Panthers are going to be losing. They'll be throwing the ball plenty. This is a really good problem to have. All right, Wandale's out. There's just too much other options here. Wandale's out. Garrett Wilson's in. Amari Cooper has to be in. He's playing the Commanders, who have been so bad against wide receivers for years. Garrett Wilson, Amari Cooper. And then I would say, here's what I'd say about the last thing. If you're looking to keep it kind of on the safer side, it's Deontay Johnson because he's getting 14 targets from Andy Dalton, almost like guaranteed 14 targets. If you want to go upside though, Tank Dell and Brian Thomas are fine because those dudes are in possible shootouts with good matchups. Actually, no, Tank Dell's matchup isn't terrific. The Bills are pretty tough on wide receivers. So I would go Brian Thomas over Tank Dell. So Wandale's out, Tank Dell's out, Garrett Wilson's in, Amari Cooper's in, and then choose between safety with Deontay Johnson and then max upside, which is Brian Thomas. Ultimately, though, just out of this, I'd be going with Amari, Garrett, Deontay. Start Ramondre or Sermon. I'd be going with Ramondre. I really like Ramondre Stevenson this week. Again, just be prepared to stomach a 0 if they do, in fact, go with Antonio Gibson. Keep an eye on reports with all that, too. DJ Moore or George Pickens. Not a big George Pickens guy. Anytime that Arthur Smith is the offensive coordinator, I'm not necessarily trying to target his wide receivers. The game in particular doesn't expect to be a shootout. It's not going to be especially pass heavy. I do like the DJ Moore's chances of finding the end zone at the Bears getting him the football. I'd be going with DJ Moore over George Pickens. All right. I'm 1-3. Koo just put 17 points on me last night. I have no clue who to start at flex in a must-win week. I have Amari, good matchup. Kirk, good matchup and great game environment. Rashid Shaheed and Wicks. My starting 2 wide receivers are Nico Collins and Jamar Chase. That's great. All right, so you're swinging for the fences here. To me, it's Christian Kirk or Dontavian Wicks. Both of those guys should get plenty of targets in good matchups and potential shootouts that should feature plenty of points. I'd be going with Dontavian Wicks because that game is more likely to go like back and forth. I will say that Christian Kirk is going to offer you the safest combination of floor and ceiling. Like, if he doesn't go off, he should still get you something, where Wicks is much more boom or bust. He could get you a ton or get you nothing. So determine your risk tolerance there. Understand that Wicks might get you nothing or very few, whereas Kirk should at least get you something. But like, if you're swinging for the fences and you're trying to hit a grand slam here, Wicks in that game is really tough to ignore. I personally, if I was making this decision right now, I'd be going with Christian Kirk. Plain, there it is. I'd be going with Christian Kirk. And I'd be okay with Wicks, if that makes sense. Like, if you go with Wicks here, Bitcoin, I'm down with that. Totally fine with that. All right. Here we go. Just trying to sort through some of these. All right, guys. I think that is going to do it. But guys, here we go. X Nelly says I missed one. Just really quick, please. I've been patient. Deontay or Achane this week? Deontay Johnson or Achane? Deontay Johnson plays the Bears. I don't love that matchup. I don't love that game, but I do love how many targets he gets. Achane against, I'd still be going with Achane here, I think. The Dolphins should be doing everything they can to get him the football. He should, like, he's a pretty good bet to get plenty of touches. I don't love anybody on the Dolphins while they don't have Tua Tagovailoa, but that game has just a 1.5 point spread. The Patriots aren't a terrifying matchup. I'd still be going with the Achane, but I think this is a good problem to have. Like, it's putting Deontay Johnson on the bench means the rest of your team is looking pretty good. I'd be going with Achane here. Eddie, I appreciate that, man. Remember me when you blow up. Not necessarily not trying to blow up here, man. I'm just trying to make a livable income so I can do what I love for the rest of my life here. So I appreciate that, man. Really, thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Thanks for the help. Keep up the good work, Nelly. I appreciate you, brother. All right, guys. I think that is going to do it. We're what, 2 hours and 13 minutes into this thing. It's wild how just standing here and talking can be so exhausting. But dude, I'm spent. I'm ready for beer, coffee, a nap, a hug, like everything that you got. Guys, real quick, if you liked what you saw from the heat map, it's $4.99. You buy me a beer, you buy me a Starbucks, the heat map is yours for week 5. Contextual matchup analysis for every single player in every single game. 250 players are in this thing. It exploded on Reddit. It went viral on Reddit. That's what launched my entire company and made Basement Brood Fantasy Football a thing. I promise you, if you've never used it before, give it a try once and you'll be hooked. And if not, I'll give you your money back. How about that? Is that fair? The link for that, I'll drop it one last time in the comments so that you guys have it, if I can find the comments here. The link for that is right here. Again, $4.99, or you can get the whole package, the whole season. And the last thing too, guys, our fantasy football Discord server is arguably my favorite thing or the best thing about what I do with this business. 198 other fantasy football players in here talking ball, helping each other with start-sit dilemmas, trade dilemmas. It's so cool to see the friendships that blossom in here. I mean, we've had people like meet up when they go to football games that only know each other through the Discord. It's so awesome. If you're a fantasy football player and you want to make the game more fun and interact with other fantasy football players, I'm telling you, the Discord server is the place to be. So, I think it's beer time, my friends. I appreciate everybody who popped in here. I appreciate all the questions, guys. Like, so many questions. You guys are what making this show so much fun and so awesome every week. I promise I will be back again every single Friday, except one in November where I'll be in Punta Cana or Costa Rica or something like that. But every single Friday, noon Central on the YouTube channel. I found out recently that it's on Twitch and Facebook. Didn't even know that. Shout out to Tanner for making it happen. But come back, put it in your calendar. I'll create a calendar invite if I have to. Put it in your calendar every noon or every Friday, noon Central, YouTube channel. That's all I got. This was episode 40, and I'm Mikey Henninger from Basement Brood Fantasy Football. I will see you on the fantasy football field in week 5. Good luck to you. Cheers. This brew's for you.